heard about now, beginning to clarify some of them here on Balance of Power. Welcome to the Thursday edition. I know it feels like a Monday for many of you, but it is Thursday here, and we've got a lot to talk about this day before the new Congress begins, and some major national security events that are about to take hold here in Washington, D.C. That's why connecting the dots on these two stories would have been very important if authorities had the ability to do that. And we want to start our conversation today with Michael Shepard. Of course, joining us here in Washington as Bloomberg Senior Editor for Technology and Strategic Studies. We wanted to talk with Michael, though, because he's been covering politics and national security in Washington here for many years. And there are a lot of stories that cross over. Michael, it's great to see you, and I appreciate your coming in. Happy New Year, for starters. This was a terrible way for the year to begin for a lot of Americans looking at scenes of terror from New Orleans, from Las Vegas. But to hear from the authorities today, somewhat reassuring to believe, at least so far, that they are not connected.
Well, terrible, Joe, as you put it, but also unsettling, especially as Americans look to, since the pandemic, really be able to revel once again in these large-scale events.
That's right.
Going to a ball game, celebrating New Year's Eve with friends in New Orleans, and attending major political events like we're about to host here in Washington, including the pre-inaugural event that Donald Trump intends to host at Capital One Arena, just around the corner from our offices here, and of course the inauguration on January 20th. But even before that, tomorrow we have a new Congress being seated and a speaker election. And then on January 6th, remember that date, they will be certifying the 2024 election results. So people have in their memory and their sense of things that can go wrong, and it is something that they are concerned about. And this is what law enforcement and public safety authorities and political authorities, including the governor of Louisiana and the mayor of New Orleans, are trying to express, this confidence and also this sense that they want to get back on their feet quickly.
There were a lot of concerns, not only seeing a cyber truck, but also the location of Trump International, that there might have been some timing here to coincide with the incoming president here, or reaction to the election of some sort. But we have to remind ourselves that these just could be two deranged people.
That's right.
According to the FBI, had nothing to do with one another.
And the FBI was quick to say that they see no immediate connection between these two events. As terrible as they were, we know quite a bit less about what took place in Las Vegas based on what we've heard from authorities so far. So we will have to see what more they can tell us about the nature of the explosion of this Cybertruck. The fact that it was a vehicle produced by one of Elon Musk's companies at a hotel owned by Donald Trump, in essence, it really does raise a lot of questions. And Musk himself furthered those questions by suggesting yesterday on X that there could be a link between these two events, and also suggesting that it was a bomb and not the vehicle itself that may have caused the explosion. So we don't really know. We don't have a definitive assessment from authorities about what took place.
What do you make of the reaction we're hearing by this? An interesting scenario when we've got an outgoing president and a president-elect both almost carrying equal weight when it comes to commenting on a story like this. We should let our audience know, by the way, about 10 minutes from now, Joe Biden is expected with his national security team to sit down in the Situation Room for a briefing on this. But a lot of people are looking at the reaction from Donald Trump. And while we heard from Joe Biden yesterday, actually went on national television, Trump took to Truth Social and started to blame the border to sort of prove some of his suggestions as
a number of his
being
supporters.
correct. Yes, they did. Let's talk about what he said. When I said the criminals coming in are far worse than the criminals we have in our country, that statement was constantly refuted by Democrats and the fake news media, but it turned out to be true. Of course, it's false, Michael. This is an American who served in the military.
An American who served in the military for a number of years. He was somebody who apparently held a good-paying job, lived in Houston, and is somebody you wouldn't necessarily connect to an event like this in the way that Donald Trump was trying to do. The Republican Party has tried to make the border security question, one wrapped around national security, two in terms of terrorism, by suggesting that the people who perpetrate these kinds of attacks with fealty or association with foreign extremist movements, that they have somehow crept over the border into the U.S. Through some surreptitious means, when in this case we saw that not to be the case. And the president-elect was commenting well before anybody in the investigation had been able to comment or offer any kind of clarification.
Yeah, went on to say the crime rate in our country is at a level that no one has ever seen before, which is also not factual. It brings us back a little bit to the tweet storms that we used to see in the first administration. What does it make you think? Because you covered that White House, Michael. You helped our bureau edit coverage from that White House, and we're about to do it again.
Well, we remember it all well. And there was a question about Trump as he was being elected. We all talked about it that night. I think we were discussing it, you and me, election night, and in the days after. Will we see a different Donald Trump? Will we see a Trump 2.0 that will be a little bit more restrained, a little bit more serene, or above doing that kind of, incendiary or provocative kind of challenge and communication to the world? But we're seeing already via Truth Social, via his posts, that he is not holding back anything.
Raring to go here on a day like this with a lot of misinformation. If you're just joining us here on Bloomberg, we welcome you with some updates on the situation in New Orleans from the FBI and from officials in the city we just heard from and brought you a briefing live here. The FBI is calling this an act of terrorism, but also making clear that Shamsuddin Jabbar, as far as they know now, was not linked to the attack in New Orleans and, in fact, acted alone. We are going to get further updates here, knowing that some of these details can evolve. We heard a little bit earlier as well. Who do we have here, guys, from that briefing? This is Christopher Rea, again, speaking for the FBI, who is Deputy Assistant Director for the FBI's Counterterrorism Division a short time ago in New Orleans. Let's listen.
There's also an FBI investigation in Las Vegas. We are following up on all potential leads and not ruling everything out. However, at this point, there is no definitive link between the attack here in New Orleans and the one in Las Vegas.
Michael, I want to talk to you about journalism for a moment. This is your profession. While you talk with authority about a lot of different things, I want to go back to something that I mentioned earlier, because you remember how frequently the first draft of history is wrong. Speak to us about the process of going through how little we still know at this point when you're crafting a story and the governor that you have to put on your own inclinations to cover what you're hearing.
We all remember the name Richard Jewell.
Oh, man.
And we remember the story about 1996.
That's right.
And the bombing at Centennial Park during the Atlanta Olympics, and how very quickly law enforcement authorities were putting blame on this man who actually was, it turned out, a hero in trying to save lives and get people away from the scene, and how it upended his life, and it ended up being completely wrong. And there was somebody else, a domestic terrorist, we should note, Eric Rudolph, who was later blamed for it. And so we can see that the first draft of history is quite rough. And that is one of the risks that we run in reporting on this. We have to make sure that we're attributing it, that we're gut checking it, and we're not just going through the motions of putting out there anything that we are hearing from authorities. It's important for us to say with authority and clarity ourselves that it's early, there's still a lot of things we don't know, and also emphasize what it is that we don't know as well.
So we're bringing you into the newsroom now. These are literally the conversations that we have, and this is why you can trust Bloomberg, knowing that this is our approach here. We just knocked down another bit of misinformation. That was the idea that this man in New Orleans, Jabbar, was wearing a suicide vest. The FBI wanted to be very deliberate, was very deliberate in knocking that down.
Yes, they were deliberate in knocking that down, and also debunking the number of improvised explosive devices that have been found. There were reports circulating in the hours after the 3:15 a.m. New Year's Day attack that there may have been several devices, but the FBI was quick to say that there were only 2 found in the vicinity of the scene. They are still scouring the area and the larger city of New Orleans, of course, ahead of the Sugar Bowl this afternoon. But they wanted to make clear that this was not as wide-scale or coordinated as they had initially feared. yesterday.
I mentioned earlier, Michael, that we heard from Joe Biden. He spoke in the second half of the day yesterday. Let's listen to the president.
We're tracking the explosion of a Cybertruck outside the Trump Hotel in Las Vegas. Law enforcement and the intelligence community are investigating this as well, including whether there's any possible connection to the attack in New Orleans. Thus far, there's nothing to report on that score at this time. While this person committed a terrible assault on the city, the spirit of our New Orleans will never, never, never be defeated.
I'm sure Joe Biden didn't think he'd be spending his New Year's Day talking about this as they wind things down at the White House. Where's the line when this becomes an event that draws the president to that level where he needs to go before the cameras to try to get the confidence and trust of the American people in the time of this office?
Well, this is one of those moments where being presidential and acting presidential is so key because the public is looking for that reassurance. Now, what rises to that level? There are certain moments that are unforgettable. We remember Sandy Hook and how that shook the nation to its very core and how then President Barack Obama reacted and his public display of emotion, sharing what the nation felt in the moment. And there are other episodes when it's critical for the president to really try to bring the nation together and offer that sense of security. And it's not just the president, of course, as we saw the governor of Louisiana, Jeff Landry, the mayor of New Orleans, doing the same thing. But for the president, it is an essential function where the president really provides that sense of reassurance, that sense of confidence, that sense we have things under control.
It's something that only a president is capable of doing, and it reminds us of how impossible it is to prepare for moments like these. You simply have to be in the job. Michael, we're talking about not only a Sugar Bowl later today, but a Super Bowl in the Superdome. We're talking about a presidential inauguration here. We're talking about January 6th. You already put your fingers on some of these massive national security events. How does all of this change them?
Well, it will further heighten the awareness and alert level. But you and I both know that the alert level here in D.C., even during normal times, it really couldn't be higher. And yet they do have to be on their toes in a way that, they think, oh, hey, we have to take it up even further. We remember going all the way back to 1995. That was a time when you could drive on Pennsylvania Avenue in front of the White House. That area has steadily been cordoned off and blocked off, and now you really can't even cross it. And the amount of security around the U.S. Capitol, too, has been heightened to a great degree, not only because of 9/11, not only because of January 6th, but if you go all the way back to the time when a deranged gunman burst into the Capitol and shot several people, including a Capitol police officer. This is, these are the kinds of events that authorities are having to brace for in a way that, it makes Americans uncomfortable. We like to think we would have access to these places, but, we live in a free and open society. But the security needs are really overwhelming us, the people, and the officials who have to maintain this.
Michael Shepard's helping us bring back a lot of memories, a lot of tough ones in this case. I was in Washington on the day of the Oklahoma City bombing when they shut down Pennsylvania Avenue. It never reopened. That wasn't the plan that day.
You're right, Jim.
But it never reopened, and I wonder if that's going to be the story for Bourbon Street. I know that it's back in the possession of the city. They cleaned things up this morning, but why shouldn't that be a pedestrian-only way?
Well, and this would really further calls for that. They had planned to put in some heightened security, some additional bollards to block vehicular traffic. That hasn't been carried out yet. We'll probably see that accelerated at some point in the wake of all this. And other cities will have to investigate whether to do this in other heavily trafficked pedestrian byways too. Do they need to close some of those off as well to vehicular traffic for these same reasons? And, there are other aesthetic and urban planning reasons as well where maybe you don't want cars on that street so people can enjoy it too.
True. Yeah, the bollards are coming. And boy, you wonder if that has an echo effect in other cities with congested, pedestrian-heavy areas like this. They were closing down Newbury Street in Boston just for shopping days because it's so
in New
difficult
York?
to get around. New York has its version.
Yeah, and Broadway and Times Square have
Absolutely.
long since been closed to pedestrian to vehicular traffic, giving pedestrians much greater leeway to move around and enjoy the area. But it also does provide a measure of security for them too.
We have 14 souls who were lost in New Orleans. That number 15 we have just heard, by the way, from authorities does include the driver, does include Jabbar. There are going to be funerals, tributes, remembrances.
Yes.
Will the president be part of them?
That's a good question. And it's unclear what those plans are. We are, as authorities were quick to remind us during that news conference today, only 24 hours removed from the event itself. So the plans are still taking place. And the president will have a busy schedule too, because speaking of funerals, we also have the state funeral scheduled for Jimmy Carter on January 9th. And he is expected to give a eulogy there. So this is, a real moment for the nation in terms of reflection and mourning and appreciation, of course, for Jimmy Carter as well.
Yes, of course. It's a sobering moment and one that we like to think Washington is ready for. But if there's anyone we could have spent time with today to help us make sense of this, it was Michael Shepard. And Michael, I thank you so much for the time here reporting for Bloomberg in Washington, D.C. I'm Joe Matthew. Balance of Power back on the air this Thursday. It is the 2nd of January, 2025. With a lot more ahead, we'll turn our attention to Capitol Hill next, only on Bloomberg.
markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
It's 12:21 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. I'm Charlie Pellet. We have got stocks churning right now. The Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ, all in the green. First trading day of the new year. Stocks higher. S&P up 13 right now, up by about 0.2%. Dow Industrials a little changed, up just under 0.1%, while NASDAQ is higher by 68, up by about 0.3%. 10-year at 4.59%. The 2-year at 4.26%. Gold up $35 the ounce today, up 1.3% right now, $26.59. We've got West Texas Intermediate crude above $73 a barrel, $73.61 on WTI, surging 2.6%, and Bitcoin up 2.7%, 97,352 on Bitcoin. Carvana shares have been whipsawing, quickly swinging between losses and gains after Hindenburg Research said it took a short position in the online platform for buying used cars. Carvana right now up by 1%. And Topgolf Callaway brand shares are surging after Jefferies upgraded the stock to buy from hold, saying it appeared to be oversold at a time when the golf market is supported by what it says are robust tailwinds. Right now we have got shares of Topgolf Callaway brands up by 13.9%. For on-demand news, 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now wherever you get your podcasts. Back we go to Washington. And once again, here he is, your host, first show of the brand new year, Joe Matthew.
All right, Charlie. Great to see you, Charlie Pellet. I missed him. The voice of the subway and balance of power. Watching Wall Street for us. We'll get back to Charlie a little bit later on this hour. I've been wondering if Santa was late or if he came early. I don't know. Charlie will help us figure it out because we still have a couple of days, right, for a Santa Claus rally. We've got a big update a little bit earlier today. You might have been with us at the top of the hour as we heard from officials in New Orleans, including the FBI, with an update, of course, on the terrible act of terrorism, as they are calling it, on New Year's Day. Pretty interesting to hear from Christopher Rea, the FBI's counter-terror deputy assistant director. Jabbar acted alone, according to what the FBI knows at this point, and they have no way to connect the events of New Orleans and Las Vegas, where the Cybertruck blew up on the front steps of the Trump International Hotel there. No connection between these two events, and no network helping Jabbar that many had considered just as recently as this morning. When we do get the next update, we'll bring it to you here. Born in the United States, a military veteran. Jabbar is now one of 15 dead in New Orleans. That number updated this morning as well. So there are a lot of questions, as we just discussed at length with Michael Shepard, about what this means for security here in Washington. With more major national security events coming up in the next month than we typically see even here in the nation's capital. They start tomorrow, I guess, technically, with the start of the new Congress. It's going to be a big day around here. And assuming that we get a speaker, we're going to talk to Mike Dorning about that in a moment, that will unlock all of the things that follow, including the certification of the presidential vote on the 6th. We've got the Carter funeral on the 9th. We've got the presidential inauguration on the 20th. By the way, the night before, Donald Trump's going to be holding a rally at the Capital One Arena, where the Caps Wizards play. That's a couple of blocks from where I sit now, and right downtown here in Washington. So we've got a lot coming. But again, we have to elect a speaker first. And that may not come as easily as some thought from Mike Johnson, although he was speaking confidently on Fox and Friends this morning. Here's the Speaker of the House.
We're going to get this done. Look, I'm humbled and honored to have President Trump's endorsement for the role again, as well as the endorsement of leaders across the conservative spectrum and the Republican Party, all of my colleagues that are standing with us, and we will get this done. Look, the things that we're talking about this morning are an illustration that we live in very serious times. We cannot afford any palace drama here. We have got to get the Congress started, which begins tomorrow, and we have to get immediately to work.
Can't afford any palace drama. We might have a problem. We're told he couldn't really lose more than 1-2 votes here. The math is very difficult for Mike Johnson. And Mike Dorning's been crunching the numbers. He's with us right now on this second day of the new year. Mike, it's great to see you. I'm right, he can only lose one? If he has, Tom Massey's a no.
Yeah, Tom Massey says he's
What happens to Chip Roy?
Chip Roy?
Could he sink this thing?
He he could in theory. Now, also, it's possible, there's a lot of the members of the House are elderly and have health problems.
Yeah.
Nancy Pelosi just fractured her hip. I don't know whether she's going to come in. There's on both sides, you always have health as a potential problem. So it could be, move a couple of people. We don't know for sure. We really won't know until tomorrow morning exactly how many people have shown up. But you're right. 2 holdouts sooner or later could sink it for Mike Johnson. So there is a possibility that he might not make it. There's also certainly a high likelihood of drama between now and when there's the vote, and potentially could drag on a bit. But that said, having President Trump in your corner, having no sort of obvious rival with a lot of support, that's all tells you the odds are in Johnson's favor at this point.
I guess Donald Trump's ready to pick up the phone, asked if he would press Republicans, actually lobby with individual lawmakers. He said, if necessary, when talking to reporters, yes. You wonder if this doesn't work in the first couple of rounds. Like, we're watching Kevin McCarthy go to 15, I think it was. You go through a couple of rounds and you wonder what kind of patience the conference would have for this, knowing it's most likely going to end with a Mike Johnson, right? It just might not come that easily at first. Is that fair?
That seems the most probable outcome, that like at a certain point, whether it's before the first vote or after some other votes, people just
Exasperation.
get exasperated and strike a deal. That's certainly the way it normally works in Congress. This isn't a situation where you have some rival who's going to be building steam, at least no apparent rival at this point. So that, if you were betting, you'd say that's the most likely outcome. But we can't be absolutely certain at this point.
Once we get a speaker, we then swear in lawmakers and actually adopt a rules package, right? So we determine how the chamber will function. It was released Wednesday, 36 pages. Not a surprise to see the motion to vacate that rises to 9, right? But has to be Republicans. That's the first time we've seen this, to have a partisan motion to vacate. So, in other words, Democrats couldn't fire Mike Johnson.
I haven't read the rules. I don't know whether you could still find some way. I do think that that even with this 9-member, to fire Mike Johnson, you could still effectively castrate him if you had like enough Republicans voting with all the Democrats against every rule. You could essentially say, I'm going on strike.
Yes, right.
And I'm joining the Democrats in defeating every rule, and you've neutered the speaker at that point.
You're talking to somebody who's been in Washington a while. When you ask for a definitive, and Mike Dorning says there's always a way around it. But that's Washington.
If a majority of the House turns against the Speaker of the House, even if you can't depose him through the Republican rules, you can effectively eliminate him as a factor. That would require, that's a little bit harder than just the motion of no confidence have the vote, but a determined opposition can still block Mike Johnson. And if he moves against a minority to punish them, they have the potential to punish him harder. They essentially have a little nuclear weapon that they could launch on him and say, you're going to do this to our committee assignments? Well, we're going to vote against you on every rule, and you're never going to be able to vote on anything.
Get ready to suspend the rules for another year, boys and girls.
Don't think he's got this locked
I understand.
up just if he can put in a rule like that.
So this will be easy tomorrow, right? Mike Dorning just set the table. Come back and talk to us when we know. Of course, Mike Dorning in Washington here.
Interesting year for Mike Johnson.
It's one day in, for crying out loud. Interesting year indeed for all of us. You're going to want to be with us throughout 2025. As we keep our eyes on energy prices as well today with important news from overseas. Russia halting natural gas flows to Europe via Ukraine, and we saw it coming, the contract to use the pipeline expiring on the 31st, and we wanted to talk to Mike Malone about this. He's the senior commodity strategist for Bloomberg Intelligence with his eyes on oil and gas. Mike, it's great to see you. Happy New Year, and welcome back to Bloomberg This only represents, from our reporting, about 5% of the gas going to Russia. Does it move prices?
In Europe, still it does, but for the U.S., not much though, because the U.S. only exports a total of about 20% of our natural gas. We're constrained. About 10% of that is liquefied natural gas that can get to Europe. So it's a very small portion of U.S. gas. The number one thing right now is weather. We are having a colder than normal winter, but gas just pumped up to about $4 per MMBTU last week. That's typically been a sell level, certainly for about 10 years, with the exception of COVID and the Russians' invasion of Ukraine. And to put that in context, that's the front contract, that's the February contract. If you look at that March contract, it's already down to $3.20.
How about that? Well, Ukraine obviously trying to thumb its nose here to Russia to the extent that it can. What does it mean for Moscow? What does it mean for inflows in Russia?
Well, definitely cutting off that revenue flow. To me, it's been kind of a matter of time. I think the market's looking at it that way. Also, what's happened in Syria, things for Moscow and the Soviet Union, or former Soviet Union and Russia, are starting to tumble. And this is just another sign, cutting off the revenue. One key way to really cut off the revenue is for crude oil prices to go down, which I think will. That'll even shut down more of their revenue and their ability to the wages war, which is kind of the bias, and that's certainly the Trump bias. This drill, baby, drill, I think will actually be a pressure factor in that big excess producer of energy, and that's Russia.
Yeah, well, I don't know. WTI is up 3% today. We're back above $73 a barrel, and you wonder what drill, baby, drill has to do with that. What's moving stocks or prices in crude today, Mike?
In short term, right now, it's a bit of short covering, Joe. This market last year got the most short it ever was, most commodities, as the commodity market perceived this excess of supply developing. And that's the key thing. There's one word to describe global crude oil, and that's glut. It's increasing, and every time prices go up, that excess of supply out of the U.S. increases, the need for OPEC to curtail supply increases, and actually demand out of China is decreasing, particularly as you see this proliferation of EVs. So the overall outlook for crude oil is, it's been hovering around 70. Yes, it's bounced on the first day of the year. I think the next $30 for crude oil is more likely to be towards 40, and that's been the low for three or four times. Well, that's been the low since 2008, 3 or 4 times.
Yeah.
And just think of the next 30 bucks if it were to go to above 100, which is very rare, would mean more of a supply-demand spike, would actually mean more of a pressure on global economics. So overall for crude oil, glut means lower prices. Something has to change.
I've only got about 30 seconds here, Mike. I don't want to set you up, but what does that mean for big oil stocks? The Exxons, the Chevrons of the world stay away in 25?
Well, they're making money, but they're also hedging forward in futures, locking in some of that, so they'll still make money. But I think crude oil's going down would actually be bad for the entire energy sector, and particularly the energy sector. The difference is prices go down, but they do have earnings and profits.
Great to have you back, as always, Mike Paglone. Happy New Year. BI, Senior Commodity Strategist at Bloomberg Intelligence. We've covered a lot of ground so far. We need to assemble our panel, and I'm glad to say our signature panel is back together today. Jeannie Shanzano and Rick Davis with the latest in a wild 24 hours here in the United States. 2025 is upon us. This is Bloomberg.
1240 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. A major shift in sentiment since our last update. We have got the Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ in the red. Not just lower, but worst level of the session right now. Wall Street jitters and the S&P now down 35. A drop there of 0.6% as we pick up the new trading year right where we left off with a decline for the equity market. S&P, as I mentioned, down 0.6%. The Dow also down 0.6%. NASDAQ right now down by 0.8%. But the Russell 2000 index of small cap shares holding on to a gain of 0.1%. 10-year at 4.58% with a 2-year right now 4.25%. Spot gold up $29 the ounce, an advance right now of 1.1%. 26.53 on the precious metal. West Texas Intermediate crude rallying 2.3% to start the new year. 73.39 on New York crude. We have got Bitcoin up by 1.7%. Right now, Bitcoin 96,343. The first U.S. economic number of the new year is out, and it is up. Bloomberg's Vinny Del Giudice explains.
Weekly jobless claims finished 2024 at an 8-month low. We're talking 211,000 new claims, lower than Wall Street forecasts. The data point to a stable U.S. labor market, though there have been some signs of moderation. The government issues its monthly employment report next week, and preliminary forecasts point to a slower pace of hiring in December. Vinny Del Giudice, Bloomberg Radio.
The aviation analytics firm Cirium is out with its list of the world's most punctual airlines. Aero Mexico, number 1 with 86.7% of flights arriving on time. Number 2, Saudi Arabian Airlines with an 86.35% on-time performance. In the U.S., Delta is number 3 at 83.35%. Among other U.S. carriers in the top 10, United Airlines, number 10 with a punctuality rate of 80.93%. For on-demand news, 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now wherever you get your podcasts. Bottom line here, down day on Wall Street, S&P down 0.6. Back we go to Washington. Once again, your host, there he is, Joe Matthew.
All right, Charlie Pellet, you know we're going to be okay when you hear Charlie's back. We'll do this again with Charlie in just a few, keeping tabs on Wall Street here on what is the first trading session of the year. Welcome to 2025. Welcome to the Thursday edition of Balance of Power. I'm Joe Matthew in Washington. We started off with an important update on New Orleans, from New Orleans, with authorities there, both local and federal. And we learned a lot from the FBI, calling this an act of terrorism. Let's listen.
Let me be very clear about this point. This was an act of terrorism. It was premeditated and an evil act. This was obviously a critical incident, and with that, lots of information and tips come pouring in from law enforcement, first responders, and the public.
That's Christopher Rea. Get used to that name if you are not already. The Deputy Assistant Director for the FBI's Counterterrorism Division, speaking earlier in the great city of New Orleans with a couple of very important news updates here. Not only the FBI's full-throated assessment of this being a terror attack, we also learned very early on in the briefing that the attacker here, the accused attacker, Shamsuddin Jabbar, acted alone. And Rea also made clear that after 24 hours now of investigating, they do not see any definitive link. Quote, there is no definitive link between the attack here in New Orleans and the one in Las Vegas, unquote. Of course, referring to the explosion of the Cybertruck on the front steps of the Trump International Hotel yesterday. We heard from the mayor, we heard from the governor, and we're going to be speaking a little bit later on this hour with the former mayor of New Orleans, Mark Morial, of course, now the head of the National Urban League. Right now, it is our signature panel. Glad to say they're with us on the first show of the new year. Rick Davis, Bloomberg Politics contributor, Republican strategist, and partner at Stone Court Capital, alongside Jeannie Shanzano. She's back with us today, Democratic analyst and political science professor at Iona University. It's great to see you both here. Rick, we've been talking about not only what we know, what took place in New Orleans, what took place in Las Vegas, but what it will mean for security of major events beginning at 4 o'clock this afternoon at the Sugar Bowl, all the way through the January 20th inauguration of Donald Trump. And we've got a lot of big ones here in Washington between now and then. How does this change the security landscape?
Yeah, first, I would say our prayers go out to the deceased in this event and all those families who have wounded ones. You really hate seeing this, but it's not that we haven't been warned. Our national security leaders have been testifying to Congress all year long that said we should be in a heightened state of alert, that, the destabilization of the Middle East creates opportunities for places like ISIS. And here we see this occur on our homeland. So we have zero tolerance for terrorism here, and I have no doubt that that will lead to significant heightened security over the course of this month, certainly. We have lots of major events occurring, especially in Washington, the month of January. And I have no doubt that our security apparatus will go into, high gear when it comes to protecting the American public and our leadership. So yes, I think we will see a significant increase now that we know that we are in another environment similar to 9/11, where those outside our country, choose to invoke harm on those who are inside it.
Jeannie, we heard from Joe Biden, who addressed the nation late yesterday. He's in the Situation Room right now, if things are on schedule, being updated and talking with leaders of the federal law enforcement agencies here. We heard from Donald Trump as well on Truth Social. The incoming president said that when I said that criminals coming in are far worse than the criminals we have in our country, the statement was constantly refuted by Democrats and the fake news media, but it turned out to be true. Of course, it was not, Jeannie. And I wonder what your thoughts are here from the incoming president speaking so freely without knowing what's going on, whether we're going to start reliving some memories from the first administration every time we go on social media.
Yes, it's a harsh reminder of the fact that he spreads misinformation. There was a very early Fox News report that suggested this may have been attacked from abroad, somebody who came in. As you mentioned, that turned out not to be true, and yet the president last night at midnight or early this morning, and then again just 3 hours ago on Truth Social, is blaming Joe Biden and the border. And of course, this was done, as far as we know now, by an American citizen. So it is a very concerning reminder that the incoming president traffics in misinformation. And even if we are to say and excuse an early news report, which can obviously be wrong with so much information coming out, he doesn't correct himself. He doubles down on that misinformation in pursuit of a policy end, which is shutting the border. So it's a stark reminder of what we're going to see in the next 18, 19 days when he is inaugurated into office.
Donald Trump also went on to post the crime rate in our country is at a level that nobody has ever seen, which is not factual. Rick, what do you make of this? Because I thought that Donald Trump was elected because of Americans' feelings on the border, on dealing with border security and immigration policy. Does he need to double down like this, to use Jeannie's phrase, to make the point? Why even go there?
Yeah, look, this is vintage Donald Trump. Anything that happens on the front page of the newspaper gets converted into leverage for him to get what he needs on a public policy basis. And I have no doubt that he is well aware of the situation with the attacker being a citizen and not having been an illegal immigrant. And yet, he does want to close the borders. He does want to deport millions of illegals. And he will use this as a way of trying to convince people that somehow the two are linked. And we shouldn't be surprised by this. He did this throughout his campaign and through the first administration that he served as president. And so, we used to call it spinning. Now we just call it, sort of the Trump meander. It's just the way he operates. He'll pull things out of the front page and use them to his best accounting. And I have no doubt it probably will be effective with some, especially his base, who believe he is the truth teller, that news coming from Donald Trump is the only news you can believe. And so this is how all these different stories get created that cause conspiracy theories to evolve. And I have absolutely no expectation other than the same that that'll happen in this case too.
Well, there's a call on Capitol Hill now to seize on this moment and advance the confirmations, or at least the process to confirm Donald Trump's national security team. Jeannie, we've heard from all corners on this, including John Thune himself, the incoming majority leader, says the threat posed by ISIS will outlast this administration. And this is a clear example of why the Senate must get President Trump's national security team in place as quickly as possible. I don't know the way you think that this should go here, but we're talking about Pete Hegseth, who's got a hearing set for January 14th, Tulsi Gabbard, and then Kash Patel is not till February because of the order of events, Jeannie. Do these dates need to change?
You know, they are right to the extent that transitions are a very vulnerable time for any administration. And of course, given how controversial so many of the nominees in the national security realm are, it makes it all that much uncertain what's going to happen in these hearings and then as they move to the floor. And you mentioned them, Hegseth, Patel, Gabbard. So it's unclear. You know, you mentioned Pete Hegseth. He does have a scheduled hearing on the 14th. Depending on what happens there, it's unlikely that we see any of these people in place by the time the inauguration occurs. And that is what should be so concerning to all of us, because of course we do need sound people in place in the national security realm in order to protect us from threats both at home, as this one was, and abroad. And it's unclear at this point whether we get those. And you mentioned we heard this from Thune. We also heard it from Barrasso, and we've heard it from others. So once again, we are going to hear them using this attack for political ends, which is to push forward these nominees in a faster way than we might have otherwise seen them move through.
What's protocol in the Senate? What's appropriate here, Rick? You spent enough time there to know. Is this an attack or is this appropriate?
No, this is not an attack. It's appropriate. The Senate sets its own standards. Many of these individuals who are up for confirmation are still pending an FBI background check. Senate will not ultimately take a floor vote on one of these members without it. And so some of it is based on just the bureaucratic process of going through those kinds of efforts. There's also financial disclosure forms and things that they have to fill out. So some of it's on the backs of the individual who's going up for confirmation themselves. So there's a great deal of work to be done, and it's just been in a week that most of these meetings have taken place to actually introduce these individuals to the senators who will be voting on them. So I actually think this has been a really fast transition. Donald Trump did a really amazing job of getting these picks out to the Capitol Hill. They showed up and walked the halls and did the meetings prior to the holidays. It's meteoric in its speed with which this is happening. And so I think this administration is actually very well positioned to have a speedy transition and put these critical individuals in place. And if they have a problem, they'll know very quickly whether they do. I would say what Donald Trump has done with his comments on this event is actually added a list of questions to each of these individuals. And it will now be, do you believe these individuals were acting as illegal immigrants and crime, or do you believe this is a terrorist attack from citizens of the United States? And it's just going to be another example of putting them in the position of having to disagree with the incoming president.
Fascinating. Jeannie, with all of that said, does this make it more likely that they are all confirmed?
You know, it's hard to say. So much is uncertain. It really depends, as Rick was just talking about, on the FBI background checks, but also importantly, how they perform. The American public has not heard from these people answering questions from, in this case, what will be the Democrats, the minority. And those questions will be tough. And Rick just gave you one of them. Do you agree with President Trump, who now twice or three times went on Truth Social to say these were illegal immigrants and we need to close the border? Do you believe him, or do you believe what the FBI is saying, that this was an American citizen? You know, that's just the start of what we're going to hear, and they're going to have to answer, and we'll have to see what they say. So again, the first time any of us, the American public, hear from these people and see how they manage themselves. I should say they are all practiced people: Patel, Gabbard, Hegseth, certainly, in terms of speaking publicly, and certainly they are getting a lot of training and they're going to be well prepared. But this is going to be a lot of tough questions, especially from the Democratic side.
Boy, that is for sure. President Joe Biden being briefed in the Situation Room after we were briefed by the FBI and local authorities in Louisiana. We'll keep you posted on what we know from New Orleans to Las Vegas and back here to Washington. Huge thanks to our panel. They're back in hour 2. Jeannie Shanzano and Rick Davis as we follow the beat on an important day here in Washington. I'm Joe Matthew. This is Bloomberg.
From the world of politics to the world of business, this is Balance of Power. Live from Washington, D.C.
No known connection between New Orleans and Las Vegas. Welcome to the fastest show in politics as authorities begin answering questions about a violent New Year's Day in the United States of America. I'm Joe Matthew alongside Kaylee Lyons in Washington. Yes, she is back today, the Thursday edition of Balance of Power. Kaylee, it's great to see you. Happy New Year. As we hear from authorities today, they don't see a connection between these two events. They also now think that the attacker in New Orleans acted alone.
Yeah, it does seem, at least based on the information that federal investigators have at this time, that this was a lone wolf attack and that they did say this is terrorism that was inspired by ISIS, which of course has raised many questions as we still await further clarity on motive here, on how, if at all, there is any connection, which authorities do not see definitively at this time, between the cyber truck that exploded in Las Vegas and what all of this means, considering it happens not just right at the start of a new year 2025, but a January in which there are many high security events that are taking place here in Washington, including a state funeral of a former president and inauguration of a former and new one.
Yeah, we're going to talk about a compressed schedule in the month of January, certainly here in the nation's capital, and it really begins tomorrow. If we look at it like that, Kaylee, with the start of the new Congress, and there are a lot of questions still today. We've been asking them for the last couple of weeks about whether Mike Johnson has the votes to hold the gavel, where we can actually get out of the blocks in this new conference. This new Congress, we will find out together around this time tomorrow.
Yeah, it's going to be fascinating considering Johnson does have the support of President-elect Donald Trump and Elon Musk, but that might not be enough to get him the requisite votes, at least on the first round. We'll see how many it takes, remembering how it went last time around. So we'll have more on all of these top stories with Bloomberg's Laura Davison in just a moment. But we begin, as always, with a check on the markets. As the new year of trading begins, Charlie Pellet has a look from New York. Hey, Charlie.
Hi, thank you very much, Kaylee Lyons. Indeed, happy new year. Not so happy for the bulls. We have got the Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ, all very much in the red right now. We're holding close to session lows on this back-to-work Thursday with the S&P down 35, 58.45 where we stand right now, a drop of just about 0.6%. The Dow also down 0.6%, down 250 now. NASDAQ down 145, a decline of almost 0.8%. Interestingly, the Russell 2000 index of small-cap shares higher, little changed, up just under 0.1%. 10-year right now, trading at 4.57%. We have got the 2-year 4.24%. Gold up $32 the ounce, up 1.2%. West Texas Intermediate crude up 2.2%. WTI now 73.31 a barrel, and Bitcoin up 2%, 96,650 now on Bitcoin. Tesla shares weighing on the market, down 7% right now. Tesla's annual vehicle sales dropped for the first time in more than a decade, despite a year-end push that sent deliveries to a record in the fourth quarter. Again, Tesla right now down by 6.9%. Recapping, stocks lower to kick off the new trading year with the S&P down 0.6%. Balance of power continues now. Back we go to Washington. Joe Matthew and Kaylee Lyons.
All right, Charlie Pellet with a look at the start of a new year of trading. Thank you so much. Indeed, 2025 is upon us, but it has been a tragic start to the year for many families who are impacted by a series of attacks that authorities say today they don't believe are actually related. Of course, an attack in New Orleans on Bourbon Street in the early hours of New Year's Day, and a Cybertruck explosion in Las Vegas just outside Trump's hotel in the city. And of course, we are hearing from Trump, the president-elect, who is set to be inaugurated just 18 days from now, about these events. He suggested, Joe, that there is some tie here to higher crime and specifically illegal migration in the country. Though what we know of the suspects that have been named by authorities is they are U.S. citizens who both served in the U.S. military.
That is absolutely right. We've not seen a correction on the post on Truth Social from Donald Trump, who suggested that this was proof that he was right all along, talking about crime rates here in the U.S. and coming across the border. We did, Kaylee, here a short time ago. We brought the briefing to you live from New Orleans. Not only local officials, but federal authorities who are there. The FBI, of course, has been in control of this investigation. The Deputy Assistant Director of the FBI's Counterterrorism Division, Christopher Reyes, spoke a bit earlier, making it clear that this was a lone wolf attack, no connection to Las Vegas, and it kind of changes the contours of the way we're looking at this as we head for some massive national security events here in Washington. It really all starts tomorrow with the election of a new speaker. Yeah, the 119th Congress will begin tomorrow, but the members can't actually take their seats, be sworn in to their new legislative roles until there is a Speaker of the House to oversee the business of the House of Representatives. And it's just not clear at this time whether or not Mike Johnson, who of course was Speaker, the second Speaker in the 118th Congress, is going to have the votes to at least easily get him over the finish line, with already one Republican, Congressman Tom Massey, saying he would not vote for Johnson, and Johnson can only afford for one more voice to add its name to the chorus. Will that be Chip Roy? Some are wondering. We don't know. And also, what will happen to the new rules package that has been proposed as well? The confirmation hearings, and there's a lot of crossover here with what we're talking about, the events in New Orleans and Las Vegas has prompted senior Democrats, including John Thune himself, the incoming majority leader, to call for a hastening or an advance in the schedule for these confirmation hearings so the national security team specifically can be put together in time for the inauguration. It's unclear if that's possible, and that's where we start our conversation with Laura Davison, who directs our political coverage here in Washington, D.C. at Bloomberg. Happy New Year, Laura. It's great to see you. Is that something that will come from the events of the last 24 hours, an accelerated confirmation schedule for Donald Trump's team?
You'll certainly see pushing for that. We saw Stephen Miller sort of in the aftermath of all of this. This really just makes the case that, we need to get all of these national security folks confirmed as soon as possible. There's already some of these top administration officials. Pete Hegseth already has his hearing or confirmation in the Senate for January 13th. So you're starting to see those get scheduled. However, there's already sort of a pushback from Democrats saying, look, we're going to move methodically. We're not going to hasten things just because of the events of recent days.
Well, and there's also a question as to whether some of the pushback against these nominees, like Tulsi Gabbard, for example, who's faced a lot of scrutiny over her relationship with the now ousted dictator in Syria, Bashar al-Assad, if the scrutiny actually gets more intense, if there is concern about a resurgence of some of these terrorist groups or those affiliated that are pledging allegiance to them, as the FBI said, the New Orleans attacker specifically was inspired by ISIS.
This is going to be really interesting. Lawmakers are going to come back into town, today, later tomorrow, and they've had, basically 2 weeks when they've been away from each other. They haven't been talking, and sort of some of the concerns of 2024 are now old news. These new things come to light, particularly with the events in Syria in December as well. That Tulsi Gabbard is one of those names that is coming up as someone who, if Republicans are going to say, okay, there's one that we're not going to confirm, she's sort of at the top of that list. We'll see kind of how these things shape up going forward. These signs that potentially the New Orleans attacker, the suspect there, was inspired by ISIS. We'll see how that news normally says it's stated.
Just constantly blown away by how quickly the news cycle, the conversation can change. But I suspect these hearings are going to be difficult one way or the other. Does it make the others more likely? For instance, Pete Hegseth more likely to be confirmed? Will it maybe move up the date for Kash Patel's not supposed to have a hearing in the middle of February this month?
It's certainly possible. On the Hegseth front, a lot of Trump's closest allies, they said, look, if he can kind of survive those really raucous 2 or 3 weeks he had, he's probably good to go. That if you didn't have more people coming out saying, look, I can't support him, that ultimately people would fall in line. We saw that with Joni Ernst. She didn't say outright she would support him, but she said she would support him through the process, whatever that means specifically. On Kash Patel, he's another one who people have raised some concerns about. But the calendar is just going to get really tricky, because the Senate has all these rules and procedures, and there's a lot of stuff they want to do. They want to do an immigration bill, in the Senate as one of the first things. The House doesn't necessarily agree on doing that yet. We'll see what whoever the next speaker is, where they go. But there's just a lot of things that Republicans have said they want to do on day one. And day one, like every other day, is only 24 hours and only so much you can fit in.
Well, let's talk about who that next speaker is, because obviously Mike Johnson would like to stay in the job. Donald Trump has suggested he wants Mike Johnson to stay in the job, as does Elon Musk. But we have very serious questions as to whether tomorrow, when the new Congress convenes, Mike Johnson is going to be able to get the votes. How steep is this hill he has to climb? And is there anyone else who could climb it if not him?
So he could only lose, we'll see who actually shows up in the room that tomorrow to vote, but he could only lose a handful of votes. You have Tom Massey saying no, he won't vote. There's not a clear person, if it's not Mike Johnson, then who? You floated Chip Roy earlier. He is someone who has sort of built a following in the House, except he also has bad beef with Donald Trump. They go back, he supported DeSantis in the primary, and Trump is unlikely to come out and support him. Jim Jordan's name has always come up during these discussions. But it's not clear. Steve Scalise, also he ran last time. He has had some of his own health issues, though he does have broad support within the conference. It's possible that we go through several rounds of voting, 2 or 3 or 4 rounds of voting for some protest votes that have the Republicans get out of their system, and then ultimately
That's
Mike
a win
Johnson.
after Kevin McCarthy, right? Anything below 15,
less than 15,
you're good.
Exactly.
So this is going to be, a real tense moment. It's possible he sails through, and then that particular drama is behind us. But his job is still on the line, no matter what happens. All you have to do is make a couple Republicans mad, and he could be out of a job.
Yeah. Narrowest majority we've seen in almost a century.
Majority of one is what we're on track
for. It's not going to be easy for him. Bloomberg's Laura Davison, our politics editor here in Washington. Thank you so much. Now, we are just learning from authorities in Las Vegas related to, of course, the Cybertruck explosion that happened there, that the Las Vegas Police Department will be holding a briefing less than an hour from now at 2 p.m. Eastern Time, pertaining, of course, to that incident, which authorities did tell us earlier today they do not believe is necessarily directly related, at least they can't say so definitively, to the attack that happened in New Orleans in the early hours of New Year's Day.
Yeah, that's for sure. This also was a deadly event. As we learn more about the driver and the source, both of these vehicles came from that same Turo service that had a lot of folks attempting to connect the dots. But as of now, we don't have the ability to do that. No definitive link, according to the FBI.
No definitive link, but what the FBI did say definitively was that the events that took place in New Orleans, an attack that killed 14 people plus the suspected perpetrator, was terrorism.
Let me be very clear about this point. This was an act of terrorism. It was premeditated and an evil act. This was obviously a critical incident, and with that, lots of information and tips come pouring in from law enforcement, first responders, and the public.
We want to get more reaction now to these events and what they mean, and turn to Jane Harman, who is chair of the Commission on the National Defense Strategy, also former Congresswoman from California, and author of Insanity Defense: Why Our Failure to Confront Hard National Security Problems Makes Us Less Safe. Jane, thank you so much for being with us here on Bloomberg TV and radio as we consider the FBI's characterization of this individual, Jabbar specifically, as someone who at this time they believe was a lone wolf inspired by ISIS. It raises the question of how the U.S. can better combat radicalized lone wolf terrorists like this.
Well, this continues to be a very hard challenge. Soft targets like 3 a.m. in Las Vegas when the bollards are down, in New Orleans when the bollards are down, or Las Vegas, are hard to protect totally. I mean, New Orleans has to do a better job yesterday, but it is interesting that both attacks occurred right around the new year. And the local authorities have said there's no connection, but I would just offer the fact that there are copycats and there could be more, and I hope we don't have a failure of imagination here. It seems to me there would be motivation by ISIS because of how Syria has gone, and we have attacked them in Syria, we the U.S., to hit more soft targets in the U.S. And let me just point out that they're not targeting Democrats or Republicans. They're targeting America. So we better pull together a little here, as we did after 9/11, and understand that our country, not just one party, is under attack. And that motivates me to say one more thing. These people were not illegals coming across the southern border. Let's get over this. I'm not saying there isn't a border issue, and a bill could have passed months ago if Trump hadn't blocked it. But I'm saying that there are other threats to America and to our infrastructure from many countries and many terror groups. And having a responsible group of people in chairs in the, at the Pentagon and the DNI and all the other senior and the FBI law enforcement positions matters.
Well, indeed, the point's taken, Jane, and we haven't seen a correction on that Truth Social post. But I wonder your thoughts on what we heard from the outgoing director of the FBI, who has been framed as a sort of bad guy by the incoming administration. He's basically been fired or forced to resign. But it was Christopher Wray who repeatedly said in congressional testimony last year that the United States faced a significant threat from lone wolf terrorists inspired by the events in the Middle East specifically. And now we have this truck with the ISIS flag and basically what the FBI director was warning us was going to happen. Does he need to be acknowledged for being right?
He was right. And he's not the first person to say this. We've been talking about this since 9/11. Right after 9/11, I became ranking member on the House Intelligence Committee. And we talked, again, not on a partisan basis, about threats to America. He is right. I'm kind of sorry he's resigning. He has a 10-year position, and he's now creating a circumstance where possibly the Trump appointee or whoever is confirmed for the position may be forced out in less than 10 years. The whole point of a 10-year tenure was to put him beyond political whims, sort of like the Supreme Court, but they have life tenure. But the point is to make the FBI an independent agency, and I worry a lot that could change very quickly.
Well, you're alluding to, Jane, of course, Kash Patel, who has been nominated to lead the FBI next, needs to be confirmed, as does Tulsi Gabbard, who has been tapped to lead or be the director of national intelligence. There's Pete Hegseth, who's been tapped for defense secretary as well. Do these events make all of those confirmations easier to achieve in the U.S. Senate?
Unclear. I know that that's what the Trump administration is pushing. But if I were a senator, which I'm not, and I wanted to exercise my responsibility to approve these nominees, I would want this to go at a reasonable pace, not too slow, but not too fast. Putting the wrong people in these positions, and the Senate has to determine if they're wrong, really violates the Senate responsibility to advise and consent. And I would point out that the Senate hasn't passed budgets on time since 2011, the year I left. Kind of interesting. And they haven't done this function, or they may not do this function well. And they have passed on all opportunities to authorize wars, and we've been in a few of them. And, you know, at some point, some voter's going to say, hey, buddy, what are you doing in your job? And I really think this is crunch time for the United States Senate, and there's some excellent senators in both parties who I hope will step up and do whatever they think is the right thing.
How's Joe Biden doing, Jane, in these final weeks of his administration? He was before the American people yesterday. I suspect he might speak again today or tomorrow after being briefed in the Situation Room on what happened in New Orleans and Las Vegas. Should he try to correct some of the information that Donald Trump is putting out here? What is the role as these two essentially compete for attention in the next 3 weeks?
Well, Joe Biden has a diminished audience. I think he has been pitch perfect on the Jimmy Carter death and planning the funeral. I look forward to attending it myself, since I was Deputy Cabinet Secretary in the Carter White House and have some very fond memories of Carter. And one of the things that's heartening is that his 4 years in the White House has been reviewed and reconsidered. He didn't do everything right, but he was a moral conscience, and we surely need one now. And Biden gets that. Biden, I think, endorsed Carter, was the first senator to endorse Carter back in the day, and they were good friends. And he stepped up to that, and he does need to speak out here if he has an opinion. Certainly, he should. I think this claim that these people crossed the border to carry out these attacks, which is totally bogus, has to be corrected.
It's great to have you back, Jane, especially on this day. Happy New Year to you, despite the news that we've been discussing. And we look forward to another year of conversation with Jane Harman, chair of the Commission on the National Defense Strategy, former Congresswoman, of course, with a lot of questions still to be answered, Kaylee, though the FBI has been doing a pretty good job knocking down misinformation, ideas of connections that may not exist, and the fact that he apparently, the attacker in New Orleans, was not wearing a suicide vest, as had been reported early on, the FBI saying that's not true as well.
Yeah, and again, the FBI saying that they do believe that it was just a single suspect that was involved in that attack in Louisiana, a lone wolf at this time, and they do not believe the public is in danger. We'll have much more still ahead here on Bloomberg TV and radio.
121 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. We have got the Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ in the red, not just lower, but just about the low of the session right now, with the S&P looking at a 40-point drop, down by about 0.7%. The Dow down 287 now, also down 0.7%. NASDAQ down 149, down 0.8%. Russell 2000 index giving up earlier gains, now down by 0.1%. Could see our fifth day of declines on the S&P 500 index. And again, first trading day of the new year, but a move lower. 10-year, 4.59%. The 2-year, 4.24%. Gold up $32 the ounce, surging 1.2%. West Texas Intermediate crude up 2.2%. Bitcoin also up 2.2% right now. Bitcoin, 96,820 on Bitcoin. Carvana shares are whipsawing, down by almost 3%, swinging between gains and losses after Hindenburg Research said it took a short position in the online platform for buying used cars. Topgolf Callaway brand shares are surging just about 12% after Jefferies upgraded the stock to buy from hold, saying it appears to be oversold at a time when the golf market is supported by robust tailwinds. Again, recapping, stocks lower to kick off the new trading year, down now by 0.6%. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now, wherever you get your podcasts. Balance of Power continues. Back we go to Washington. And once again, your hosts, here they are, Joe Matthew and Kaylee Lyles.
All right, Charlie Pellet, thank you so much, helping us kick off the new trading year here. And tomorrow is going to be a big kickoff as well in Washington, as the 119th Congress takes its seats. And of course, a pretty big order of business has to happen first in the House of Representatives, and that is an election of a speaker. It's required for the chamber to get on with the course of the rest of its business, including the swearing in of members. Mike Johnson, of course, is the current Speaker of the House. Donald Trump has said he would like Johnson to remain so, as has Elon Musk. But already, at least one Republican member of Congress, Congressman Tom Massey, has said Johnson will not get his vote, and he can only afford to lose one more, with a very tight margin in the House at this time. Mike Johnson pled his case on Fox News this morning.
We're going to get this done. Look, I'm humbled and honored to have President Trump's endorsement for the role again, as well as the endorsement of leaders across the conservative spectrum and the Republican Party, all of my colleagues that are standing with us, and we will get this done. Look, the things that we're talking about this morning are an illustration that we live in very serious times. We cannot afford any palace drama here. We have got to get the Congress started, which begins tomorrow, and we have to get immediately to work.
Did he say palace drama in this House of Representatives? Yeah. Let's assemble our panel. They're with us on this first program of the new year. Jeannie Sheehan Zaino, Senior Democracy Fellow with the Center for the Study of the Presidency and Congress, Democratic analyst, and Republican strategist Rick Davis, partner at Stone Court Capital. They are both Bloomberg Politics contributors. And great to have you both with us here. I don't know if the math is working for you here, Jeannie, but I believe Hakeem Jeffries said not a single Democratic vote. So that means that Mike Johnson can basically only lose one. His name is Tom Massey. Are we going to have a speaker tomorrow?
I thought the same thing, by the way, about the palace drama. I guess he's fancying himself the king or the prince or something. Can I just throw a monkey wrench in this whole thing and say, if I was Donald Trump today, I would be on the phone with Matt Gaetz saying, get yourself to Washington, D.C. You go in and you make this a 220, because as you and Kaylee keep talking about, it's 219. He can only afford the one. Gaetz gets in there, he can afford a little bit more. It wouldn't, be a home run, but that's what I'd be doing if I was Donald Trump today, and give Mike Johnson a little bit more breathing room.
I'm sure there are plenty of people on Capitol Hill right now praying, Jeannie, that exact scenario does not happen. Former Congressman Matt Gaetz has said he doesn't intend to take his seat that he was elected to for the 119th, though I guess we can't rule anything out. Barring that scenario, Rick, we obviously know about Tom Massey. There have been other Republicans who have cast a lot of doubt on whether or not they would support Mike Johnson, thinking here specifically of Congressman Chip Roy of Texas. How hard is this going to be tomorrow?
Yeah, look, I think Jeannie kind of alludes to what the really magic could be here, and that is changing the denominator. It's 51% of people, members voting on the floor at the time. So anytime you take someone on or off the board, it changes the overall configuration. So you're right. He can't afford to lose two. But if there are fewer members voting, and that includes both Democrats and Republicans, then it could actually enhance his chances of winning. And I think, the big question is Victoria Sparks. Is she going to show up? She said she's not going to caucus. She's not interested in playing party politics. So she could actually enhance Johnson's opportunity to be Speaker on the first ballot if she doesn't show up. And also there are others who have problems with Johnson. Some of the Freedom Caucus members, Andy Biggs from Arizona, good example. He's not real keen on Johnson. He hasn't said whether he'll support him or not. Just don't show up. He'll make his case that he never voted for him, and at the same time, he actually helped him get elected. So that is a pretty typical Washington parlor game. I wouldn't be surprised to see it play out here. My guess is that Democrats all show up in force. So the more Republicans that don't show up, the easier it is for them to actually get Speaker Johnson elected.
Rick just said something important, Jeannie, that he passes on the first round. Is that the job tomorrow? Or after what we saw with Kevin McCarthy, is it anything under 15 is a win?
I think anything under 15. Listen, at this point, if they can get a speaker tomorrow, even if it takes a few rounds, that would be a good thing. And of course, the person everybody is watching, because we know, as Kaylee mentioned, that Massey is a firm no, is what happens with Chip Roy. And what we understand is he has said, maybe Mike Johnson names him chair of the Rules Committee. That may help him get to a yes, because he's not a firm no yet. So in addition to the denominator issue that Rick was talking about, a lot of this is going to be, what can you do for me, Mike Johnson? What kind of carrots can you give to get me to yes, or at least to stay out of the chamber, and so you can get to yes? And that's what we'll be watching as well. If they were to name Chip Roy chair of the committee, he's already on it, that would be problematic for a lot of other Republicans. And Democrats are going to be there in full force. Even Nancy Pelosi, who broke her hip recently, is going to be there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we heard that from the Speaker Emerita herself today from the airplane. As we consider this notion that this obviously has to happen at some point to certify the results of the presidential election, which is scheduled to take place on Monday, January 6th, Rick, it speaks to the very serious nature of the business the House does have to deal with in pretty short order. Not just, of course, that, but then there's other things happening in January, including a state funeral for former President Jimmy Carter on the 9th, and there's the inauguration on January 20th. Just given this very stacked calendar of events, how much pressure does that put on this situation, and Mike Johnson specifically, to try to find a resolution here by potentially, say, negotiating the rules package that was put out in the last few days?
That's right. This is no typical year in transition. Republicans now have each of the chambers of power, the Senate, the White House, and the House. There's an expectation that because of that, they'll step out lively and get a lot done in the first 100 days. We have, even how much they can get done in the first year. And so I think there's enormous pressure there. And then, of course, you point out the constitutional requirements. This is a presidential election year. So you have to actually certify the election on the 6th of January, and you have to actually have an inaugural on the 20th. And so these are deadlines that are gonna really press hard on the willingness to have a lot of mischief in this first day. I think that it's actually going to make it easier for Johnson. Nobody's that enthusiastic about him. Nobody thinks that his first year in office was particularly smooth or successful. And so there's not like a desperate want to have him in his leadership. But the reality is he's short a couple votes maybe today. Everybody else on the list of likely successors would be short 30 or 40 votes on the first ballot. Yeah. And so Republicans know that the minute they reject Johnson, they open themselves up to a lot of potential political harm and delays that could actually put pressure on these important constitutional dates. So yeah, it's not so much everyone's excited about Johnson getting another term as Speaker, but they fear the outcome if he's not. And that is enough probably to get him over.
Well, for the benefit of our radio listeners, we had a graphic up showing the busy month of January. Starting tomorrow with the new Congress, as Kaylee mentioned, we go through the 6th, the election certification. state funeral on January 9th. We have the inaugural, of course, on the 20th. I'll add Donald Trump's rally here downtown at the Cap Center. That'll be the night before the inauguration. Jeannie, there are a lot of questions about securing these events after what took place yesterday in Las Vegas and New Orleans. Realizing now, according to the FBI, these events, however, were not connected. Does that make us feel better about managing these massive security events in the nation's capital?
You know, I don't know if it makes us feel any better. Even if we go before what happened in New Orleans and Las Vegas, we see the president-elect, he was victimized by 2 attempted assassinations, just really unprecedented amount of violence in this last presidential election. Now these 2 incidents, which as you mentioned, they're saying are not connected, but it is still an environment so scary in terms of the amount of violence. I'm even just thinking about the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court just issued his annual State of the Court report, and the number 1 issue he highlighted was the challenge that justices are facing as it pertains to threats to their life, violence. We even have a justice of the Supreme Court wearing a bulletproof vest. So I think all of these, what's going to happen in D.C. over the next month, security is going to be very tight. They're already starting to plan boarding up the place. And I think it really is going to be a big challenge. Are we up to the challenge? Absolutely. And we have enough notice of these events for sure. Yeah. But as we've seen in the last few days, just one lone wolf can do enormous amount of damage.
Well, and we can add a few items to the calendar in January, Rick. For example, January 14th is when the confirmation hearings for the nominee for Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth, will begin. As we consider these national security-oriented cabinet officials who want to join the second Trump administration, how much do the events of the last 36 hours influence their confirmation prospects?
Well, it puts a lot more heat on them, right? So nobody's going to want to see delays in this process. So they've laid out a schedule for many of these national security appointees to have committee hearings, which would then trigger, obviously, votes on the floor of the Senate. And so, yes, nobody wants to see that delayed. And, of course, on top of that, it'll put more pressure on things like background checks to be done on time, so there are no delays to that process. So it creates tension inside the system. And as Jeannie was talking about the Supreme Court, I was reminded, in addition to all these things happening in January, don't forget that the Supreme Court will be hearing the TikTok case in just a couple of weeks. And so we'll have lots to talk about on balance of power throughout the month of January.
Oh, you best believe it. And you best believe we'll be talking to our signature political panel about all of these things. Rick Davis and Jeannie Shanzano here with us on our first show of the new year 2025. Thank you so much to you both. Joe, I'm tired already. And it's literally just begun.
Yeah, don't worry. You'll have this weekend to eat your Wheaties. We'll come back full strength. We are full strength today. They're all with us in the Bureau. Stay here on Bloomberg TV and radio.
It's 1:40 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. Back to work Thursday, first trading day of the new year. Stocks are extending their losses. Just about worst level of the day right now with the S&P down 45, a decline of 0.8%. Dow Industrials also down 0.8%. The Dow dropping 320 points. Nasdaq is down 170, a decline there of 0.9%. And after an earlier advance, the Russell 2000 index of small cap shares is lower. We've got that index now down by 0.4%. The 10-year with a yield of 4.57%. The 2-year 4.24%. Gold up $30 the ounce. Spot gold up 1.2%. West Texas Intermediate crude oil now higher by 2%, 73.16 a barrel. And Bitcoin up 2.1%, 96,784 on Bitcoin. Aviation analytics firm Cirium is out with a list of the world's most punctual airlines. Aeromexico, number one, with 86.7% of flights arriving on time. Number two, Saudi Arabian Airlines with an 86.35% on-time performance. Delta came in third at 83.35%. Delta shares trading lower along with other airline stocks. Delta right now down by 2.8%. We've got United, which is number 10 on the list, by the way, down 2.3%. And American down 3.2%. Balance of power continues now. Back we go to Washington. Once again, your hosts here, they are Joe Matthew and Kaylee Lyons.
All right, Charlie Pellet, thank you so much. An authority not only on Wall Street, but on aviation. Someday I want to take a plane ride with Charlie Pellet somewhere. He takes these adventure trips, you know, to land on the shortest runway in the world. Ask Charlie if you want to know how to fly. That was fascinating to hear. So great to have you with us. It's the Thursday edition of Balance of Power. Welcome to the new year. As we try to get our arms around breaking news that started yesterday, of course, in New Orleans. Then it was Las Vegas, and today it's Washington, Kaylee, as we learn more about what did and did not happen. We've had so many questions about linking these two events. The FBI in New Orleans earlier today making it clear that there is no link. Let's listen.
There's also an FBI investigation in Las Vegas. We are following up on all potential leads and not ruling everything out. However, at this point, there is no definitive link between the attack here in New Orleans and the one in Las Vegas.
And so as we await more information as these investigations are ongoing, we're also considering what this means for the order of events that will take place here in Washington in the next few weeks. As we've mentioned, the 119th Congress begins tomorrow. The certification of Donald Trump's presidential election victory is on Monday, January 6th. There's a state funeral on the 9th and, of course, inauguration on January 20th. And in the meantime, we could have some hearings for national security-oriented nominees who Trump has tapped to join his second administration. And we're starting to see some weigh in on the urgency of those confirmations as a result of these events. So for more now, we want to go to Bloomberg's Tyler Kendall, who is live at the White House. Tyler, what else are we hearing in terms of political reaction?
Yeah, hey, Kaylee. So President Biden actually just touched down here at the White House off of Marine One last hour. We're then told that he was immediately shuffled into the Situation Room where he's meeting with his national security team to get an update on these incidents. President Biden always had these pre-scheduled remarks at the top of the next hour on a different subject. We're going to wait and see whether or not he gives an update to the nation on either of these incidents, because as you've been covering and as we just heard the last time that President Biden made remarks, he said that the FBI was probing whether or not there were either direct links between these two incidents, and the FBI has since confirmed that there are not. Now, they also confirmed that the New Orleans attack at least was an act of terrorism. We're also waiting for an update from Las Vegas officials. That's also expected to happen at the top of the next hour. I can tell you, though, about that investigation that law enforcement on the ground in Las Vegas have confirmed that they're actually working pretty closely with Elon Musk after the Tesla team came out and supplied them with footage from Tesla charging stations around the country that allowed them to essentially track this vehicle up until the point of its explosion. Now, Kaylee, as you're mentioning political reaction, we're also waiting to see if there was potentially a political motive when it came to that incident, considering that it happened in front of a Trump International hotel in Las Vegas.
Tyler, we know that the president, based on your reporting, assembled his Homeland Security team in the Situation Room a bit earlier. We're going to be receiving a briefing from authorities in Las Vegas coming up at 2 p.m. Eastern time, about 15 minutes from right now. we're curious, of course, whether we're going to hear from the president again after this, but he has something else on the schedule here, awarding the nation's second highest civilian medal to Liz Cheney and Benny Thompson for leading the January 6th committee in the United States House. This will be an important moment in the final throes of this administration today, won't it?
Right, exactly. And actually, that brings up a further question about security, particularly when we are talking about January 6th, just on Monday, when we are expecting Congress to count and certify the Electoral College results in favor of President-elect Trump. We already knew that the Secret Service was ramping up security ahead of it after what happened in 2020. And it's also leading to questions about security for the inauguration. I can tell you from where I'm standing right here on the White House North Lawn, security and barricades are already going up in front of the White House as they gear up for this. The Secret Service has declared it a high security risk incident, which means that they are going to bring in law enforcement agents from around the country, much like how we saw when we were on the ground at the Democratic and Republican national conventions this summer.
All right, Tyler Kendall on the North Lawn of the White House. Tyler, thank you so much for the reporting today. As we try to get our arms around the start of this new Congress, it will be right at this time tomorrow. We'll be talking with you on Bloomberg TV and radio about what may be happening with a speaker's vote. Of course, to bring in the new Congress, to swear in the new Congress, you need to have a Speaker of the House. And somebody who knows a little bit about that is Brittany Martinez, who worked in Kevin McCarthy's Speaker's office, Republican strategist and founder of Espina and Company. It's great to have you back, Brittany. Happy New Year. What's your expectation for tomorrow when the 119th Congress attempts to begin?
Well, thank you for having me back, and Happy New Year to you as well. You know what? I think that Johnson's going to get the vote. I think he's going to get the first round. I do think that a little bit of chaos is going to ensue, but he did get the Donald Trump endorsement, so I think his speakership is safe for the most part.
Well, so let's talk about that Trump endorsement, because many people have suggested to us that that is what would make or break anyone's speaker's bid, but it doesn't seem that Trump is necessarily swaying the minds of those lawmakers that we have greatest question about. Tom Massey, as we repeatedly said, is a firm no, but we're unclear on people like Chip Roy or Andy Biggs. Keeping in mind, Chip Roy endorsed Ron DeSantis in the Republican presidential primary initially. So does Chip Roy really care what Trump says?
I think that the folks that are the most concerned are probably the ones that you mentioned and may not care that much what the former president has to say, but there were some folks during the CR who were very tough on Johnson beyond those people. So I think in that sense, it'll help those people, the freshmen coming in. I think they don't sway their vote, but yes, you're right. There are a couple of outstanding ones in the previous Congress, especially who probably won't vote for Johnson, at least not on the first or second vote. I would expect it to maybe go to 3 votes. If it went longer than that, I would be a little bit surprised. But it's a 119th Congress. Hopefully things will be more normal than they have been. But it's been a weird few years, so I think that it doesn't happen on the first time.
All right, this is good, though. Brittany Martinez tells us 3 rounds. I'm going to remember this tomorrow. Brittany will play the tape back. We're hearing anything less than 15 is a good look for Mike Johnson. There's a question, though, about whether the gentleman from Florida shows up. Is Matt Gaetz going to show up tomorrow to be sworn in and help Mike Johnson and Donald Trump with the math?
I wouldn't be surprised if Gaetz shows up, but I think he just likes to be a little bit of a chaos agent. I don't know if he would go through the whole motion of being sworn in and doing a vote for Johnson, maybe. Again, I know we talk about this every time. It's been a few weird years in politics, but I don't know if I see him going through all those steps, if he's going to just step back again. But maybe he shows up just like George Santos keeps showing up, just to sort of be involved. And he starts, I think tonight is his first episode, if I saw that correctly on Twitter, on OANN. So I think he's ready
he
to...
got us to talk about it.
Free promotion.
Little did I know what I was thinking.
Sorry.
Well, but we should all keep in mind that it was Matt Gaetz, a single member of Congress, who brought the motion to vacate against your former boss, Kevin McCarthy. And he was able to do so, Brittany, because of what McCarthy had to negotiate to become Speaker at the beginning of the 118th Congress, putting certain people on the Rules Committee and allowing any one member to have that power to try to kick out the Speaker. The rules that have been put forward this time are different. It would take 9 Republicans to oust a Speaker. Do you think that will stay firm, or if Johnson isn't able to get the votes he needs on ballot 1, is he going to have to start negotiating, as we saw McCarthy do?
I think going with 9 was a smart place to start, trying to start from a place of strength. Where what it had been for a few years, it had been 5 votes. What it had been historically for a while, it was 1 vote. So McCarthy brought it back to the 1 vote. I believe that we started with the 5 and then brought it down to the 1. So yes, I think that was intentional and strategic in order to be able to negotiate with the Chip Roys, the Tom Masseys, the Freedom Caucus folks who aren't sold on him yet. And I don't expect that it'll be 9 ultimately. I could see it ranging in the 1 to 5 range. And I might be wrong on this too. We'll see, what ultimately turns out tomorrow. But I don't see 9 is way too many for these Freedom Caucus guys. I think they'll try to do the 5 or below.
How about for just Republicans? There's a proposal here to make it for Republican members only. So Democrats, for instance, would not be able to fire the Republican speaker. Jim McGovern's head exploded when he heard about this, and he put out a pretty stern warning that it would never happen in his statement. What does the final product look like there? Is it D's and R's?
I think it should be both. Ultimately, it's a Congress for the people. So why are Republicans, just because we're in the majority, the only ones who can bring forward that motion? When do we want Democrats to do the same thing in a few years, ultimately, when the House flips again? Because that's just the way that Congress works. I think that when you're in the majority and you're in the position of power, you need to be careful about the rules and precedent that you implement, because in a few years, that might come around to bite you.
Well, especially when you're in a majority, but just barely, Brittany. Even if Mike Johnson canned on round 1, 2, 3, or however many rounds it takes to secure the gavel, even if he can get that done, if it proves difficult to accomplish tomorrow, what does that signal about the way legislation is going to move through the House in this Congress, knowing that Donald Trump has some pretty big-ticket items he wants to see done in short order?
A lot of people out there are saying that Trump really has these first 2 years to try to push his agenda forward, and that afterwards it's going to be a lame duck. To be honest with you, I feel like we're already kind of going into a lame duck. Like you said, the majority is so slim in the House. In the Senate, it's a little bit stronger, but it's going to be hard to be able to move the needle on some of these Trump things if Republicans and Democrats don't work together. We saw that issue come up with CR funding at the end of the year, only a couple days ago, I guess. But at the end of 2024, we saw that issue come up. We saw Elon come in and try to sway things his way. We see Vivek. We see, the Doge folks, admin folks. So you know what? I am not going to be surprised if this slim majority proves to be pretty tough to navigate.
There's been an idea here that it's different this time, Brittany, than it was for Kevin McCarthy or even for Mike Johnson the first time around, because of the election of Donald Trump. That vote needs to be certified by January 6th, on January 6th, according to the U.S. Constitution. And some think that's enough leverage to get every Republican member of the conference to vote for Mike Johnson so Donald Trump can move into the White House.
I don't envision this going as long as McCarthy's vote did. It was the 15 rounds, but it was also over the course of a few days. I think this will probably get done tomorrow. I wouldn't be surprised maybe if it goes into the early hours of Saturday morning, sort of like it did when it was McCarthy on that final vote. It was very, very early in the morning. But I do think that Republicans are ultimately going to want to come together and push this speaker forward, and no one else is going to be able to get the votes. So they can be upset about it. They can use that to negotiate. But ultimately, I think that's all they have is the tool to negotiate. I don't think anyone else is going to be able to be in that role unless Trump decided to put an endorsement behind somebody else, which is not going to happen. Yeah. And so I think we'll see it ultimately come together tomorrow.
All right, Brittany Martinez, founder of Espina and Company, and of course, former staffer to Speaker Emeritus Kevin McCarthy, who had to go 15 rounds to secure the gavel at the beginning of the 118th Congress. Thank you so much. We still have, of course, a long day of events, it seems, Joe, to look ahead to for tomorrow, at least here in Washington. In the meantime, just moments from now, we'll be looking to Las Vegas, where the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department is expected to hold a briefing at the top of the hour, 2 p.m. Eastern time, on that Cybertruck explosion that happened yesterday, which authorities have suggested today they do not see a definitive link between that incident and the attack that happened in New Orleans.
That's the last we heard from the FBI roughly 2 hours ago. No definitive link, but they are indeed setting up the podium right now in Las Vegas. And we'll bring you this briefing as we did the one from New Orleans live here on Bloomberg TV and radio. Now that Kaylee's back, we'll meet you back here at 5 p.m. Eastern Time for the late edition of Balance of Power as we gear up for the big vote tomorrow.
Yeah, that's right. We have a busy show coming up, both as we consider the events of the last 36 hours and the 36 hours, 36 days, weeks to come. So much more is still ahead here on Bloomberg. Happy New Year.
This is Bloomberg Business Week. Insight from the reporters and editors that bring you America's most trusted business magazine. Plus, global business, finance, and tech news as it happens. Bloomberg Business Week with Carol Masser and Tim Stenovec on Bloomberg Radio.
All right, we are back, kicking off the new year. It's so good to have you here for Critical Holiday.
Are you talking to me?
Yes, I am.
Oh, thank you.
To
Good
everybody.
to be here. Okay.
Welcome back, everybody. This is Bloomberg Business Week. Radio, TV, YouTube, Bloomberg Originals. I'm Masser, Tim Stenovec. First trading day of 2025. A lot coming back to investors. Some of the same narratives, some of the same themes, but a lot of unknowns, safe to say. And we've got a new year, Tim, that, yeah, we had an earlier rally, but that's really run out of steam.
Yeah, right now we're seeing the S&P 500 down about 0.7%. NASDAQ down about 0.8%. The Dow down about 0.7%. As you mentioned, a new year, but a similar trade after that earlier rally just fizzled out.
Yeah, the last few days of 2024, they were pretty anemic and they were lower, and it seems like that's continuing here on this first trading day of the new year. And so, still ahead, top of mind for us, certainly this hour, almost everything, because there's a lot that Wall Street expects in 2025. We're going to get into that. It's the Bloomberg Big Take.
A couple hints. AI's on there.
Yes.
Inflation's on there.
Yes.
Plus a lot more.
Yes.
Also on the markets, why we are in the late stages of a major financial euphoria episode. Bill Smead with thoughts on that.
Yeah, looking forward to talking to him. Plus, Tesla is also top of mind, but also top of mind is what is going on in Las Vegas, of course, after that explosion of the Cybertruck. Let's head there now.
Truck explosion at the Trump Hotel on Las Vegas Boulevard yesterday. Our work never stopped. As many of you went to sleep last night, and I just want to give you an update on a lot of what it is that we found through the processing of the Cybertruck. This is a joint investigation involving the FBI, the ATF, the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department, and these folks worked through the night and found a lot of stuff that is very useful for this investigation. As you look at this Cybertruck here, we had to transport this down to our fleet services so that we could really get through this thing. And I remind you that the subject inside wasn't able to be removed for a very long period of time because he was burnt beyond recognition. And so as we continue to move through this, I'm going to talk a little bit about his identity and what we believe, but I would like to highlight a couple of things that the teams found inside of the Cybertruck that are useful to the investigation. And that first and foremost is a military identification. We also found a passport. We found a Desert Eagle 50 caliber semi-automatic pistol. And if you'll notice on a lot of these guns that we're going to talk about here, they're almost just burnt beyond recognition as well. There's an SLR model B30 semi-automatic firearm. Number of fireworks that were still in the vehicle that had to be removed. Notably, we found an iPhone and a smartwatch, and then several credit cards were also in the name of our subject. Our subject is 37-year-old Matthew Livelsberger. He's of Colorado Springs, Colorado, born July 22nd of 1987. Now, as you'll see here on a picture of his driver's license, let's see, the question really still remains for me, and I know that there's a lot of you folks in the media that are identifying this person as the person in our vehicle. As I mentioned to you already, his body is burnt beyond recognition, and I do still not have confirmation 100% that that is the individual that was inside of our vehicle. And so as I'm calling it now, the subject or person of interest, I will not come back until I have the confirmation through DNA or medical records that this is indeed, in fact, the subject inside of the vehicle. Now, further complicating this identification of this individual, we also discovered through the coroner's office that the individual had sustained a gunshot wound to the head prior to the detonation of the vehicle. One of the handguns was found at his feet inside of the vehicle. Obviously, in how we're trying to identify him, and I'm feeling comfortable to give you this information, is a tremendous amount of substantial evidence to include he rented the Turo vehicle. There are 2 tattoos, one of which was on the stomach and one of which is on the arm, that we can see bits and pieces of it as in comparison to what it is that we now know he had on his body, that has given us a lot of confidence that this is, in fact, the same person. As well as which the clearly obvious, which is the credit cards, the military identification, the passport. And then furthermore, as you'll see here in just a very short period of time, we tracked his movements from Colorado to Las Vegas. And in a number of the photographs that we were able to determine, he was the individual that was driving the vehicle. And also, I'd like to iterate this point to you. We still have only ever seen him in this vehicle, and we're not aware of any other subjects involved in this particular case. Now, I would like to acknowledge a couple of things because I know what's going on in the social media world, and there are a number of things in this case that are similar to the attack in New Orleans. We do know that our subject here served in the military. In fact, he's a current member of the military. Both of the subjects served at Fort Bragg, North Carolina. What we do know about that is it's a very large military base, and we have no record that they served in the same unit or even at the same years at Fort Bragg, something that continues to remain under investigation. I also know that they both served in Afghanistan in 2009. We don't have any evidence that they were in the same province in Afghanistan, the same location, or the same unit. Again, something else that remains under investigation. And we also know, of course, that they both used the rental company Turo to rent their vehicles. As far as his military background, it's been confirmed by DOD that he was indeed in the United States Army. He was also a Green Beret operations sergeant who spent most of his time at Fort Carson, Colorado, and in Germany. He was on approved leave from Germany, where he was serving with the 10th Special Forces Group. He was also previously in the National Guard and the Army Reserve. I'd like to point out to you that through exceptional joint investigative effort, we've gotten to a place where we believe we can show you his route to Las Vegas from Colorado, and Carlos will put up the map there for you. And we know that he rented the Cybertruck in Denver on December 28th. We tracked his movements through the Tesla charging stations to Monument, Colorado on December 30th. On the 31st of December, the truck was charged in Trinidad, Colorado, Las Vegas, New Mexico, and Albuquerque and Gallup, New Mexico. On January 1st, the truck was charged in Holbrook, Flagstaff, and Kingman, Arizona. We last tracked the truck in Kingman at 05:33 yesterday morning. The truck was first spotted in Las Vegas at 7:29 a.m. yesterday. And Carlos will pull up a picture of the truck pulling onto Fashion Show Drive here. And that picture was observed at about 7:34 a.m. We know that he pulled into the Trump Valet. I believe we have a video of that. You see the Cybertruck highlighted there. So through extensive surveillance video, we were able to track him leaving there, and we know that he went to several different places along Las Vegas Boulevard, and he spent some time in a parking lot of a business near Flamingo and Las Vegas Boulevard. And we didn't have a video of the truck pulling back onto Las Vegas Boulevard from the sands. See that there? That's north on the boulevard from Sands at 8:39, where he then immediately heads to the Trump Hotel, pulls into the valet area, and as of course you all know, the explosion occurs within 17 seconds of his arrival at the valet. There's some additional investigative updates that are going to be provided to you by a couple of the other speakers here, the first of which will be our Special Agent in charge of the FBI local office, Spencer Evans. Spencer?
Good morning. My name is Spencer Evans. I'm the Special Agent in charge of the FBI's Las Vegas Division. As the Sheriff mentioned, we've been working through the night with our partners, the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department and other agencies, to gather all the facts and determine a motive to what was initially reported to the FBI as a bombing incident, to which our Special Agent bomb techs and others responded. Obviously, we're always concerned in these sorts of events to ascertain what the motive is. We understand that's at the forefront of everyone's thoughts. And so looking into exactly what the motivation is remains our number one priority. This is why the FBI's Joint Terrorism Task Force has been brought into play. The Joint Terrorism Task Force, most important part of that acronym is joint. It is done in concert with our partners, which are comprised of more than a dozen investigative agencies here throughout the state of Nevada. We've been working hand in glove, side by side, tirelessly to determine, is there any ongoing threat to the public, to identify the subject, to determine any potential connection to other events going on in the world, most notably in New Orleans, and then obviously to determine if there's anything else that we need to be tracking down. At this time, as the sheriff's pointed out, we feel that the subject has been identified, although not conclusively, waiting for DNA evidence on that front. However, we do feel like we have the subject identified, and at this time there is no information about additional subjects that the FBI is tracking on. Our resources, as I mentioned, that have been deployed in support of this event include Special Agent Bombtex, our evidence response team, which is processing crime scenes, side by side with the forensics folks from Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department, our investigators, our intelligence analysts, and then outside of the FBI Las Vegas field office, we have investigative leads that are being conducted by FBI field offices, both internationally and domestically as well. As always, when the FBI is involved with any sort of case like this, we ask for help for the public. Anyone with information related to this incident, we encourage you to please call 1-800-CALL-FBI, or you can submit a tip online at tips.fbi.gov. We've already received thousands of tips related to this incident. The challenge that we face moving forward is to separate those that are pertinent and relevant and those that can be verified from those that have not. For example, one of the tips that we received just today relates to information alluding to this subject's personal experiences related to his time and activity in the military. Again, that's unverified and uncorroborated, but one of many tips and leads that we'll be following up in the days that come. If you have any additional information, again, encourage everyone, 1-800-CALL-FBI or submit it online, tips.fbi.gov. We will tirelessly work to exhaust all investigative leads and conclusively determine what the nature of this particular incident was, what the motivation was, and to the extent possible, share all that information as we obtain it. I'll now turn some time over to the Assistant Special Agent in charge from the ATF, Kenny Cooper.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Kenny Cooper. I'm the Assistant Special Agent in charge of ATF San Francisco Field Division. ATF is bringing our expertise in post-blast investigations and our crime gun intelligence to specifically assist in this investigation. I will tell you that our Special Agent Bombtex are working with FBI and with Las Vegas Metro and sifting through that post-blast debris to find components and investigative leads that will derive from that evidence process. We're too early into that investigation process to give any determination as far as how this device was initiated. I will say that we do know that the components primarily consist of fireworks, mortars, aerial shells, and are all consumer fireworks. Nothing commercial grade has been discovered at this point, and we've identified some fuel enhancers like the Coleman fuel and BP racing fuel and some explosive targets that can be purchased at any sporting goods store. We've also, as the sheriff mentioned, we've identified 2 semi-automatic handguns recovered from the Tesla. We have successfully traced those firearms, and I can tell you that Matthew Livesberg lawfully purchased both of these firearms on December 30th, 2024. We have agents following up those investigative leads. We know exactly where those firearms were purchased, and we will share any developments from those leads as they come in. Thank you.
We also have the Clark County Fire Chief here, John Steinbeck, and he didn't have any additional updates, but if there's any questions in regards to what the fire department did during this, he's here to answer those questions as well. With that, I'd just like to say before I take a couple questions from all of you, you'll notice that we're not releasing information that we haven't corroborated and verified. We're very well aware of all of the things that are going around on social media. But that's just the way we're going to conduct this investigation. We're not putting it out until we can tell you for a fact what information it is that we're putting out. And so we're going to continue to do that, but I'm also confident to tell the Las Vegas community and this great nation that we don't believe there's any further threat from this subject or anybody associated with it here in Las Vegas. With that, Denise, I'll send you that.
Las Vegas Metropolitan Police. Give us an update on that explosion of the Cybertruck. Let's go back in as he takes questions.
Las Vegas, or had he ever been here before? I do believe we had one instance a number of years ago where he stayed at a local hotel, but we're still trying to verify that information. Sir?
David Charles, KLAS TV. There was, you have Trump himself.
Yeah. I think I'll let Spencer.
So as I mentioned, the motivation at this point is unknown. We are, as I mentioned earlier, following investigative leads both domestically and internationally as well. And so that includes search warrants and witness interviews, collecting forensic information, and basically trying to compile the facts. So there's investigative activity taking place literally around the globe, trying to determine what the potential nexus is. But at this time, at this particular moment in time, as the sheriff aptly said, we have to focus on what we know and what we don't know. We know we have a bombing, absolutely. And it's a bombing that certainly has fact-raised concern. It's not lost on us that it's in front of, of the Trump building, that it's a Tesla vehicle, but we don't have information at this point that definitively tells us or suggests it was because of this particular ideology or any of the reasoning behind it. That's the purpose of the investigation that we're conducting, is to get to the bottom of exactly what happened, why, and how.
Yeah.
You mentioned a number of similarities between this case and the one in New Orleans. How far in the investigation process do you guys go to try to rule out that they are connected, knowing that you already have a couple things that seem to connect them together?
So the question is how are we working to rule in or rule out any connections to the New Orleans event? And the answer to that is every tip and lead that comes in, every piece of evidence that comes in, we don't discount it, we work it through it. It's a interesting thing during these kinds of investigations that if these turn out to be simply similarities, very strange similarities to have. And so we're not prepared to rule in or rule out anything. There's lots more for us to do with this investigation. We haven't even gotten into the phones or the computers, which are usually very, very instructive and informative to us as we investigate. And we've got a lot more work to do to trace him, to see the stories to rule out anybody else. Lots and lots of investigative work to do, and we're just trying to give you an update on what we know now that is factual.
Was the gunshot wound to his head self-inflicted?
We believe the question was the gunshot self-inflicted, and we do believe it was, since he was the only person in the vehicle, and it occurred immediately prior to the vehicle blowing up. Back there, sir?
Yes, sir. Morgan Chesney, NBC News. With the evidence you've seen so far, are you comfortable now calling this a suicide mission?
The question is, am I comfortable calling it a suicide mission? I'm comfortable calling it a suicide with the bombing that occurred immediately thereafter. I'm not giving it any other labels. The question is, did we have any of the family members share any particular red flags? Again, I'll go back to what I know is circulating on social media, but none of that has been verified at this point.
And final question, real quickly. All the components you found inside the Cybertruck, were they all purchased in Colorado?
The question is, were all the components found inside of the Cybertruck purchased in Colorado? And I don't know the answer to that. That's part of why we're doing the extensive part of the investigation. So, as you all know, we had just successfully completed a New Year's Eve event where hundreds of thousands of people come to Las Vegas. I've extended our posture just like it is for a New Year's Eve event, where I have thousands of police officers that are working day in and day out. Obviously, dozens and dozens of people that are working on this investigation as well. We'll continue to look at what that security posture looks like, but I'm confident in the safety of our community as we move forward. Go ahead, you middle there. The question was, is there any criminal record? None that I'm aware of. That has also got to my attention that he had a criminal record. And I said that the Cybertruck was rented on December 28th in Denver, Colorado. Right here. Hi. The question is, do we know if he checked into the Resorts World the day before this? I'm not aware of that information. Sir? The question is generally about the security posture, and that's entirely our entire community, not only Fremont Street and the Strip, but surrounding neighborhoods as well, just to make sure that we have the community feeling that level of safety that they need to feel after an event such as this. Right next to you there. The question is, how were we able to use the tracking or the charging stations to track the vehicle all the way through? And I'm not exactly sure how to answer that question just yet. I know that there's some capability by being able to determine that the car is connected to the charger. One of the things that we're looking for is anybody that may have been at the charging location at the same time. We're looking to try to identify them because their vehicles would have also had cameras that would have taped anybody in and around them. We're trying to get people that may have been in the same locations at the same time that have video on their vehicle that could provide that video to us as well. I'll take two more. Go ahead. Yeah, the question is about the Cybertruck and the lack of damage to the Cybertruck and containing the explosion. Carlos, if we could put that truck back up there, it might be helpful. But, you know, you'll see if you look on the outside of that vehicle, it's hard to tell from that photograph. But other than the windows being gone, that's a bit more disassembled than it was at the scene, and the back area being blown off. There's no evidence of physical damage to the sides of that vehicle. And so the explosion that was in that vehicle sort of vented out and up, but it didn't even damage the glass doors of the truck. So I'm not sure what that means. I also know that there's a number of unexploded pieces of the things that he had inside of that vehicle, and so I just don't think that it was done as well as he was expecting it to be done. So the question is, are we able to recover the video from the Cybertruck? And many of you may know that those Cybertrucks contain a tremendous number of cameras. Again, Mr. Musk has sent out a number of his folks that will be arriving here this afternoon with the intent to try to capture the part of that captured all of the video from inside of the truck. Sir?
That it was, I just want to be careful with my language here, but the level of sophistication is not what we would expect from an individual with this type of military experience. That most of that, the materials inside that Tesla were fuel to help fuel a greater explosion. But it's too early to answer any question is if there was sophisticated connectivity to those components to make it ignite in the way that it did.
All right, there was one last hand over here. I'll take your last question.
Any idea of the suspect has been in touch with any outside terrorist groups? Has this investigation extended globally?
The question is, do we know whether the subject's been in touch with any outside terrorist groups or if it's been investigated globally? And Spencer, you want me to? Okay.
So the question about whether it's being investigated globally, absolutely. Like I said, we're running down investigative leads around the world. No information that we're aware of right now that connects this individual to any terrorist organization around the world. But that's obviously the thrust of the investigation, is ruling out that there's any sort of, terrorism nexus, and then again, getting at what the ideology is.
We appreciate you all coming, and we will be back before you when there's substantial updates to provide to you. Thanks for all your great work.
All right, folks, you have been listening to a live press conference there in Las Vegas. The Metropolitan Police Department of Vegas holding that press conference. FBI agent responsible for that division, that area, the Vegas sheriff also, basically, of course, covering what happened when a Tesla Cybertruck exploded outside the Trump Las Vegas hotel. That was hours after a deadly attack in New Orleans French Quarter on New Year's Eve. That killed at least 15 people, injured dozens. The Cybertruck explosion killing the driver and injuring seven others. But Tim, now we know the driver. We're getting more information about what happened leading right up to that explosion.
Yeah, the Las Vegas police have identified Matthew Leibelsberger as the suspect, but they still need to get DNA to identify the suspect. The suspect did have a gunshot wound to the head before blast. The sheriff did note that he believed it was self-inflicted, but that has yet to be confirmed. The Las Vegas police, Carol, also not aware of any other subjects in this case.
I think what's also key, as these two incidents happen so close to one another in terms of timing, that connections, not ready to rule in, not ready to rule out, is what we heard from that press conference. Comment made that very strange similarities with the case in New Orleans in terms of what happened in Vegas. The motivation unknown for the Cybertruck blast at that Trump Vegas hotel, that coming from the FBI. No ideology leading to either the president-elect, nor to Elon Musk, nor to Tesla. So there is still more to be known.
We should note Tesla staff is planning to arrive this afternoon to assist with the probe. We just heard that from the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department. The FBI also saying that the blast is being investigated globally, but there's no current evidence connecting the subject to a terror group.
But I will say just one last point, that confident, at least we're hearing from the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department, that they are confident in the safety of their community at this point. Let's get to the broader security implications for the United States. Nick Wadhams is back with us, National Security Team Leader at Bloomberg News. He joins us from our D.C. bureau. A lot going on. We continue to get some more elements to this story, more information, Nick. But what are you hearing from your sources or from the U.S. security and intelligence areas and departments about where this goes, or what are the many big questions that maybe are still out there?
Well, it looks like the biggest question now has essentially been answered, which to a lot of people's mind was what was the connection between these two incidents. Obviously, during the press conference there, you heard the sheriff say that there were certain similarities, but officials are now saying essentially that they see no direct connection between these two attacks. There had been some reporting that the two suspects may have, there were both obviously U.S. military veterans, may have overlapped briefly at a base in the United States during their time when they served. But for the moment, that looks like it was a little bit of a false trail, and there was no connection, though that was, a lot of people's immediate instinct. The other thing that really struck me from that press conference was them saying they are looking globally, so trying to figure out putting each of these attacks in their context. Obviously, there was the New Orleans attack. The suspect had an Islamic State flag in his car, authorities said. No such indication on the Las Vegas one. But it looks like authorities are not ruling out the possibility that these may have not been lone actors, that they may have had some support network. So that's still a big unknown that we're looking into.
What surprised me, or what really struck me, Nick, during this press conference, especially compared to the one we saw with the FBI and other law enforcement officials out of New Orleans earlier today, was that in New Orleans, officials were very quick to say, this was terrorism, it's being treated as terrorism. We didn't hear that from this press conference this afternoon. Right. How do you read into that?
Well, a very thorny and sensitive issue, how these attacks get labeled terrorism or not. I would suspect that the reason for the New Orleans attack being labeled that way was they found that Islamic State flag in there. There was a lot of conflicting information, of course, going around in the run-up to that, whether the suspect was a migrant, had come from abroad, when in fact we learned he was a U.S. citizen, had served in the Army for many years. But when you see that flag, that Islamic State flag in the car, that's a pretty telling indication. Of course, the big question there again is, was this suspect, inspired by the Islamic State, essentially self-radicalized, as has happened with some attacks in the past? Or was this some bigger operation or part of some bigger operation by the group, which we do have indications has sort of come back after the punishing campaign by the U.S. was essentially eliminated, that there has been something of a resurgence. However, at this time, I mean, again, stressing there is still so much we don't know about either of these attacks. I think in the case of the New Orleans one, there is no immediate evidence that this was planned or orchestrated with the Islamic State, which still has a toehold in Syria, and all indications suggest that the suspect here had essentially been self-radicalized. But we're still trying to answer all those questions.
No, absolutely. And Nick, I feel like we do have a fair amount more answers as you are laying out and as we just heard in that press conference. But what's top of mind for you in terms of kind of the big question that still needs to be answered?
Well, I think, really there's the very interesting fact that both were military veterans. A lot of issues are coming to light about the background of the New Orleans attacker and the strain he had potentially been under at home. We know a lot less about the attacker in Las Vegas, though I did think it was also very interesting from the press conference there that they said, hey, they believe the effectiveness of the bomb was not sort of in keeping with the level of experience they thought that the suspect there had, which I think is obviously an indication, as officials have said, that he was a special operator in the U.S. military. So, but certainly the fact that both appear to be American citizens, both Army veterans. One we know served in Afghanistan. We're still trying to get details of the Las Vegas attacker's military record. But there are some similarities there that really beg some big questions, and we're going to be trying to figure that out over the next couple days.
Right, that one response by one of the officials at that Vegas press conference, media conference, comment made that very strange similarities with the case in New Orleans, what happened in Vegas. So still some more answers that we will all be looking forward to. Nick, really appreciate it. Nick Wadhams, who's National Security Team Leader right here at Bloomberg News, joining us right there from our bureau in the nation's capital.
From Washington, D.C. now to Detroit, I want to bring in Bloomberg News auto reporter Keith Naughton for more on this and then some other Tesla news that we learned a little earlier today, that Tesla's annual vehicle sales dropped for the first time in more than a decade, despite a year-end push that sent deliveries to a record in the fourth quarter. Tesla shares selling off as a result. We're going to get to that in just a minute, Keith, but I do want to start with the news just moments ago that we learned from officials in Las Vegas that members of Tesla staff are on their way to Las Vegas to assist law enforcement agents with finding information from this Cybertruck that yesterday had an explosive device or explosive devices in it. I'm curious what types of information they can get from what happens inside a Tesla, what happens outside a Tesla, because for people who aren't familiar with these vehicles, these have quite a few cameras recording at all times on the outside.
Oh, for sure. So, modern vehicles, particularly Teslas, are highly sophisticated. They have a lot of devices that record what goes on in the car, cameras being one of them. And so while they're not to the level of a black box on a jet or something like that, it can provide a lot of important information if you're doing an investigation like this. We have two incidents yesterday, the one in Vegas with the Tesla Cybertruck, and then the attack in New Orleans on Bourbon Street, and that was with our Ford F-150 Lightning. I've been on the phone with Ford this morning, and they are also cooperating with authorities to provide them any information they can glean from that F-150 Lightning. So the way modern cars, particularly electric vehicles, so these are both electric vehicles, both rented from Turo, by the way, and so they can provide all sorts of interesting and helpful data as this investigation goes on.
I got to ask you, Keith. Okay, and again, forgive us, folks, because we're trying to be very careful here and really just talk about facts and stuff. But is it interesting that both were electric vehicles?
Yeah, well, I mean, one way to look at that, and again, I don't want to go too far into the speculation category, but electric vehicles, in the case of the New Orleans attack, they are powered by a battery that is very heavy, that adds thousands of pounds of weight to the vehicle. So, if you're looking to maximize destructive properties, more weight will do that.
Keith, what do you make of the Turo connection here? I think a lot of folks might be familiar with traditional places to rent a vehicle, but are now hearing about Turo for the first time.
Right, and Turo, it can be a little bit like a automotive Airbnb. Sometimes it's individuals who are renting out their exotic cars. Turo's been known for exotics and for electric vehicles. We don't know, or I don't know the details of how these two were rented and where they come from. I know that in the case of Ford, from my conversations with them, they're trying to help with that. But it is a rental traditionally that has rented more exotic cars, different cars, electric vehicles, not your standard, Hertz and Avis.
All right, we're going to move along, and obviously we're going to continue to monitor any headlines that might come out on either situation in New Orleans or in Vegas. But Keith, we initially thought we were going to talk to you about Tesla's sales numbers, which we'd given everybody a heads up on New Year's Eve that we expected there to be some disappointment. I am curious, though. Tesla shares are selling off. Are investors right to be disappointed? Is it a big deal for Tesla?
It is a big deal because it's the first decline in annual sales in more than a decade. And to put it in context, when that last drop happened between 2010 and 2011, Tesla was selling about 1,200 vehicles a year back then. It's now selling close to 2 million. So it's a completely different situation. And, every once in a while, the market is reminded that, yes, Tesla is a car company. And if they don't sell enough cars, they don't make enough money. The stock has been on a tear, particularly since the election, because everyone was excited about the political influence that Elon Musk would have. It's been also rising since Elon Musk has focused so much more on AI and the robo-taxi they're developing. But when it comes down to it, Tesla needs to sell electric vehicles, and they're having a harder time doing that.
Is Tesla having the same issues that other EV companies are having? Competition from China, less of an interest in EVs and more of an interest in hybrids, high ticket prices that many Americans and people around the world can't necessarily afford, especially when you compare it with those Chinese EVs and then cars with the traditional internal combustion engines. Is that what the issue is?
Yeah, absolutely. Tesla is facing those same headwinds as the rest of the industry, but Tesla has an additional headwind, and that is the rest of the industry. They basically had the EV market to themselves until a few years ago, and particularly in this past year, we now have, I think, 75 EVs on the U.S. market. So you have GM coming finally with their EVs, and they're lower priced, where Tesla doesn't have much product to play with. What Tesla really needs to get its volumes back up is this Model Y refresh known as Juniper that's coming next year. That's supposed to be in the mid-30,000 range. Right now, Tesla's average prices are above 40,000, and they've come down a lot because Tesla's resorted to the old-fashioned, marketing incentives that normal car makers do, like 0% financing and free charging. So they've done that, and their prices have come down a bit, but they're still a little high for mainstream buyers.
I mean, is Tesla getting to the point, we often talk about a tech company that's, an upstart, on a growth trajectory, kind of owns its market, and then it matures a little bit. Is that kind of what's happening, Keith? I mean, can we kind of put that label on Tesla, or not necessarily?
Definitely from its, traditional EV selling business, it has matured at the very time that, as we said, the EV market is slowing. So, it's just a harder sell with EVs right now. The growth rate of EVs last year was in the mid 7%. The year before was 47%. So we're in a very cooling market for pure electric vehicles, and that's all Tesla sells. And Tesla's lineup is really aging, so they desperately need new and refreshed product to reinvigorate their sales.
All right, going to leave it on that note. Keith Naughton, thank you so much, auto reporter at Bloomberg News, joining us from Detroit. I should point out that Tesla, though, among those top 50 companies to watch by Business Week, this new list that they put out at the end of the year, and they talk about specifically a bunch of new models coming in 2025, so a lot of reasons that maybe could provide some momentum for the name.
That Bloomberg Business Week list among the many stories in our weekend edition of Bloomberg Business Week coming up.
Yeah, that's why I just thought it was kind of interesting that even though there's some concern here, those things to worry about. Hey, listen, the other thing, though, we are talking a lot about right now is
is what's to come overall when it comes to the markets. And this morning, our Bloomberg Live team hosting a live chat on what's ahead for markets in 2025. I moderated along with 3 key members of our Bloomberg team, and this chat conversation was a complement to today's Bloomberg Big Take that is among our most read stories on the Bloomberg. It's all about so much that is coming at investors this year, but how, normally we rely on economic data or expectations for growth or outlooks from strategists, but really it's all about kind of one individual, Tim.
Yeah, that person is anything but dull also. We're talking about the president-elect Donald Trump, and 2 of those key members that joined the live chat along with Carol earlier today join us now. With us, we have Bloomberg News senior editor Sam Potter, who wrote the Bloomberg Big Take with us from London. Also here, Bloomberg News global finance correspondent and the co-host of Open Interest on Bloomberg TV, Sonali Basak, joining us from New York City. Sam, I do want to start with you and just talk about how this year's list is a little different because of this individual who is kind of behind everything happening on Wall Street in 2025.
Yes, indeed. It's a case that all the calls for once are unified because there's one factor that looms over them, and that's Trump's return to the White House. Essentially, he is bringing a whole new era of government we expect, but also returning with all his trademark unpredictability. So obviously we remember the times of his first term where he would be moving markets in the middle of the night with a tweet. So one of the big questions is what policies he's actually going to bring. He's talked a tough line on trade, on tariffs, talked tough on immigration, but as so often with Trump, what he says and what you get are not always the same thing. So what his return has done is added this layer of uncertainty to all of the calls. So everything is caveated with we will have to wait and see what Trump does, but we think this will happen.
All right, so Sonali, come on in on this. Certainly what policies we get out of the Trump administration, the Trump White House, are going to be key to what happens among all asset classes. Having said that, though, there's another policy that we're going to be watching very closely. I know you keep a watch on it, is the yield curve, which will be impacted by Fed policy. That's another thing that's going to impact, pick your asset class this year.
Yeah, if you rewound to where we were at this point last year, one of the biggest things investors were betting on was the steepening of the yield curve, and it was such a choppy trade. Now we're sitting here and finally seeing that disinversion, but what does it mean? It also means that you have a real decoupling from the long end to the short end. So Matt Miller, my colleague over on Bloomberg Interest, had shared a chart this morning that I thought was remarkable, which was the move downwards in the Fed fund rate and the move upwards in the 10-year yield, and just how stark that difference is getting. Yes, that might be good for the yield curve, but it also means that there are a lot of factors that are driving up long-term interest rates that might keep certain costs of borrowing higher, particularly when it comes to mortgage rates, which are dangerously close again to 7% here in the United States. There is a lot of questions around what that means. A lot of investors are looking at that 4.5% mark, which we've already hit on the 10-year. But then we spoke to Julian Emanuel over at Evercore ISI just this morning. He's also watching 4.75 and 5% on that 10-year as well, because investors are watching for a ripple effect for that bond market. If it starts to float higher on that longer end, does that start to seep into risk appetite? Because that traditional discounting model does incorporate what longer term interest rates look like.
That's certainly of concern. And one of the other things that came up, I thought, big time on the conversation we had, the live conversation this morning, is inflation. And whether or not, we've come way down in the last 12 months, the last year. But nonetheless, it does feel like the narrative out there, some concerns that either some of the Trump policies will be inflationary and that we still will be, to some extent, maybe a little bit on inflation watch.
Yes, indeed. I think there was a pretty reliable consensus across the calls that inflation, while it has come down and is to a degree going to be contained, the Fed is really going to struggle to get down to the 2% target. Indeed, most people don't think that's going to happen. As you just mentioned, some Trump policies, if they come as he's promised, they are going to be inflationary. Immigration crackdown could hit the labor markets, the tariffs could put up the price of goods. So overall, the expectation is the Fed is not going to be able to cut quite as fast or as far as they otherwise might have done. And indeed, some of the calls suggesting that the market was over optimistic about rate cuts. And bear in mind, these outlooks, many of them published over a few weeks ago now. So perhaps these recent bond moves reflect the fact that they were right, that the market was overly confident of cuts, and maybe the market's now adjusting.
Yeah, and
Oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead, please.
Well, I was going to say, Sam, we did see the mega cap tech names just rally in 2024 and in 2023. AI powering these companies to new highs. NVIDIA triple-digit gains.